Tonight, if you can't sleep, come with me to a snow-covered town in 1886 where one small flower shop never closed on Christmas Eve, and every stranger who walked in left behind a quiet little miracle. On the afternoon of Christmas Eve in 1886, the little flower shop at the corner of the cobbled street glowed like a lantern cupped in careful hands. Snow had been falling since morning, first in hesitant flakes, and then in steadier, softer veils, until the stone street outside seemed wrapped in pale wool. Along the row of narrow houses and small shops, the gas lamps were already lit, although it was not yet night, their muted halos pressed close by the drifting white. Behind the misted front window, where a painted sign read, "Heart and Blooms, Florist," the air was warm and faintly damp, scented with pine sap, cold earth, and the delicate sweetness of flowers that had outlived the autumn. Inside this quiet, gentle world moved a man named Elias Hart, the florist of the town, whose hands knew the language of stems and petals better than any other. Elias was not yet old in the way of years, but life and loss had settled on his shoulders with a slow, even weight, softening his posture and turning his dark hair silver one strand at a time. His beard, neatly trimmed but touched entirely by frost, framed a face that had learned to smile without haste and to frown only rarely. He wore a plain, well-brushed waistcoat over a white shirt, sleeves rolled carefully to the forearms, and a heavy woolen apron tied around his middle, faintly stained by years of green and soil and ribbon dye. As he moved from counter to counter, from bucket to shelf, he carried with him the quiet concentration of someone who had spent a lifetime arranging beauty for others, and who now found comfort in the slow, peaceful rhythm of familiar tasks. The shop itself was longer than it was wide, with a narrow path cleared between buckets and crates, tables and stands. At the front, near the window that looked onto the street, stood several tall glass vases filled with branches of evergreen, dark fir, fragrant pine, and glossy sprigs of spruce. Among them gleamed bright clusters of holly, tiny berries like drops of red wax against sharp leaves that caught the gaslight and threw it back in small, gentle glints. Higher on the walls, wreaths were hung in a patient row, each one carefully shaped by Elias's hands. Some simple circles of green, others woven with dried orange slices, cinnamon sticks, and the pale knots of ribbon that waited to be chosen. On a low table, close to the stove that warmed the back room, lay the last roses of the year, pale and faintly translucent at the edges, protected carefully through the early frosts in a small greenhouse behind the shop. Their heads drooped a little with the weight of the season, but when Elias's fingers brushed their petals, they seemed to remember themselves and lift just slightly toward the light. At a workbench along the left wall, a younger figure was arranging narrow twigs in a wooden crate. This was Tomas Feld, Elias's apprentice and nephew, a lanky boy of 17 with earnest eyes and clumsy, eager hands that had started to find their own grace among stems and shears. Tomas hummed under his breath as he worked. Some half-remembered carol learned in the church choir, the tune wobbling now and then as he tried to recall the next line. He had come to live with Elias 2 winters before, after his parents had fallen ill and gone, leaving the boy with a small, battered suitcase and a quiet grief that the older man recognized all too well. In the flower shop, the grief had not vanished, but it had softened, much like snow falling over rough ground, leaving a gentler shape behind. "Not too tight, Tomas," Elias said in a mild, unhurried voice as he passed by, nodding at the crate. "The branches like a little space to breathe. If they can rest, they stay greener for longer." Tomas looked up, flushing slightly, and loosened his grip on the twine. "Like people," he answered, attempting a small joke. "Too crowded, and we start to wilt." Elias's mouth curved into a soft, quiet smile. "Something like that," he agreed, and reached out to straighten a pine bough that leaned too far to one side. The two returned to their work without fuss, the silence between them untroubled and companionable. Outside, a carriage rattled past, wheels muffled by snow, and voices drifted thinly through the window glass. A child laughing, a woman calling someone inside, a man wishing another a good Christmas in a tone both brisk and kind. Each sound arrived softened, as if wrapped in cotton, then faded quickly into the general hush of the afternoon. The town itself seemed to be exhaling. Tasks completed, doors closing, the bustle of the past weeks settling at last into a quieter anticipation of the night to come. Elias paused in the middle of the shop and looked around with a calm, measuring eye. Over the morning and early afternoon, they had filled and refilled the display tables, wreaths carried away in careful hands, small arrangements chosen for mantelpieces and bedside tables, single roses wrapped in paper for someone's sweetheart. Now, as the light outside grew thinner and more silver, the rush had slowed to almost nothing. A few stems here and there needed trimming. A ribbon end asked to be cut clean. A stray leaf waited to be swept from the floor. He could feel the familiar curve of the day turning toward its end, and with it, the small, private thought of closing the door on the world and walking home along the quiet street. Home, for Elias, was a modest set of rooms above the shop, reached by a narrow staircase at the back. The stairs creaked in two particular places, one low and one high, and the railing was smooth under his hand from years of use. Up there, in the little sitting room with its coal grate and faded armchair, waited a teapot, a stack of well-worn books, and the photographs of a life that had grown quieter over time. His wife, Maria, had been gone for 6 Christmases now, taken by an illness that had come like a winter wind and stayed no matter how many fires he lit. Her face still looked out at him from a silver frame on the mantel, smiling as she had on a long-ago summer day, with flowers gathered in her arms. When he thought of going upstairs tonight, he pictured lighting the lamp, hanging his coat, and sitting in that armchair with his feet extended toward the fire, listening to the distant bells while the town slept below. It was a peaceful thought, if a solitary one. "Tomas," he said gently, glancing toward the window where the fading light pressed faintly against the glass. "We will close a little early this evening. The snow is thickening, and people will be hurrying home." The boy straightened, looking both relieved and a little regretful. "Shall I bring the sign, Uncle?" he asked. He always called Elias Uncle, although the exact thread of relation had grown thin in the telling of years. "In a moment," Elias replied. "Finish with that crate first. We do not want the holly escaping in the night." His tone was light, but as he spoke, he felt again that slender pull inside, a quiet longing for rest and quiet, for the gentle privacy of his own rooms. He moved to the front of the shop and adjusted the small brass latch on the door, feeling the cold seeping through the edges of the wood. On the other side, snowflakes swept across the pane in delicate patterns, some clinging a moment before melting into clear droplets that ran slowly downward. Beyond the window, the street lay in a kind of peaceful hush. White gathered at the edges of doorsteps, lamplight glowing warmly through the bluish air. For a moment, he rested his hand against the glass, feeling the temperature difference between inside and out, the small barrier between warmth and chill. Turning back to the counter, he carefully gathered a few loose ribbons, coiling them into neat rolls, and placed the remaining roses closer together so that their stems shared the same water. He moved a basket of pine cones to a lower shelf and folded a length of linen cloth over a stain that would wait until the morning to be washed. Each movement was unhurried, almost meditative, part of a quiet ritual that had closed many evenings before this one. The soft crackle from the stove at the back and the slow ticking of the wall clock above the entrance marked the passage of time in gentle, measured beats. He thought of the day's customers and their small stories, each tied to a flower or a branch of green. The young couple choosing their first Christmas wreath together, fingers brushing shyly as they reached for the same ribbon. The mother buying a modest posy to place beside the bed of a child with a lingering cough. The solitary gentleman who came each year for a single white rose, always leaving a coin more than the price on the counter and never saying why. Elias held these small scenes in his mind as one might hold petals in a cupped hand, careful not to crush them, knowing each one added a quiet weight to the day. They were the reason the shop existed, this gentle traffic of love and remembrance, of gratitude and hope. Behind him, Tomas finished tying the last knot on the crate and set the bundle aside with a small sigh of satisfaction. "It looks well, Uncle," he said, wiping his hands on his apron. "The branches will last into the new year." "I am sure they will," Elias answered. "You have done good work today, Tomas. Your mother would be proud of how your hands have learned to listen." It was an old phrase of his, one he used often, and yet tonight it felt especially true. A faint flush rose in the boy's cheeks. "Thank you," he murmured. "Shall I put out the lamps?" "Not just yet," Elias said. "Bring the closed sign, if you will. We will be ready, in case anyone should hurry in at the last moment. After that, we rest." Tomas nodded and disappeared into the back room to fetch the small wooden plaque with its careful lettering. Left alone at the front, Elias stood in the center of his shop and let his eyes travel slowly over everything he loved. The wreaths, the branches, the flowers in their patient rows, the ribbons, the shears, the old wooden counter worn smooth where countless hands had rested. The light from the gas lamps touched each object softly, pooling in quiet gold on the wooden floor, catching in droplets on the emerald holly leaves, gleaming faintly in the glass of the vases. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, full of green scent and the faint sweetness of rose and dust and winter. He reached up to adjust the nearest lamp, turning the flame slightly lower so that the light mellowed, becoming softer, more intimate. Shadows gathered gently in the corners, not threatening, only deepening the sense of enclosed warmth. Outside, a faraway church bell chimed the half-hour in slow, measured notes, each tone drifting through the glass like a calm reminder of time's quiet passage. The sound mingled with the ticking clock and the sigh of the stove, weaving a subtle music that belonged to this particular moment at the edge of evening. For a heartbeat, Elias stood very still, hand resting on the lamp, listening to that quiet music and to the peaceful murmur of his own thoughts. In another few minutes, he told himself, the sign would be hung, the door locked, the lamps lowered further, and he would climb the narrow stairs to his rooms. It would be a gentle, solitary night, with tea and the glow of the coal and the memory of Maria's smile drifting through his mind like a soft, familiar fragrance. He drew in a slow breath of flower-scented air, feeling the calm of the shop settling around him like a comfortable cloak, and turned toward the door, ready to close the day. Outside, the snow continued to fall in quiet, steady patterns, and the little town rested under its soft, silver veil, unaware that this particular Christmas Eve was not yet finished with its gentle surprises. Elias had just reached for the hook beside the door when the sound came. A quick, uncertain rapping at the glass, sharp enough to startle, but not loud enough to be called a true knock. It was the kind of sound made by someone who is not sure they should be asking for anything at all, someone who hopes and hesitates at the same time. His hand stopped midway to the hook, fingers hovering over the smooth wood of the closed sign, and he turned to face the window. Outside, framed by the wavery light of the street lamp, a figure stood in the soft swirl of snow, bending forward to peer past his own reflection into the glowing room. For a moment, Elias simply looked, his eyes adjusting to the difference between the gentle brightness inside and the muted dusk outside. The man at the door was not old, but there was an air of weariness about him, the kind that comes from worry rather than work. His coat was dusted with snow, shoulders hunched slightly against the cold, a scarf hastily knotted at his neck. One gloved hand was lifted, as though he might knock again if no one moved, and in the tilt of his head there was a polite, almost apologetic plea. Behind him, the street stretched away into a soft tunnel of white. The other shop fronts already dark, their doors fastened, their owners gone home to warm rooms and waiting tables. Elias felt, as he often did in such moments, a quiet tug somewhere beneath his ribs, a sense that time had paused to ask him a question. He could have turned the key and raised a hand, shaking his head with a regretful smile, gesturing that the day's work was done and the flowers must rest. No one would have blamed him. The hour was late enough, the weather harsh, the world ready for sleep, yet the man's face, pale in the lamplight, held a look he knew well, a look he had seen on many faces over the years, the look of someone who needed not just flowers, but the small kindness that came with them. Before the stranger's knuckles could touch the glass again, Elias reached out and turned the latch. The bell above the door chimed softly as he opened it, and a breath of cold air slipped into the warm shop, carrying with it the scent of snow and distant chimneys. "Good evening," Elias said, his voice calm and even, as if he had been expecting this visit all along. "You are just in time. Please, come in out of the cold." The man stepped across the threshold, closing the door quickly behind him with a guilty glance at Elias, as though afraid he had done wrong by delaying the closing. "I am sorry," he began, unbuttoning his coat with fumbling fingers. "I saw the lights and thought perhaps, but I know it is late. I would not bother you, only there is no bother," Elias replied gently, lifting a hand to still the apology. "The flowers are awake, and so am I. How can we help you this evening?" His tone made the words feel simple, natural, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world to open one's door to a stranger at the edge of night. Tomas had emerged quietly from the back room, the sign still in his hands, his eyes bright with curiosity. At a glance from his uncle, he set the plaque down on the nearest counter and pretended to busy himself with a bundle of ribbon, though his ears remained sharply attuned. The newcomer's gaze moved uncertainly over the shelves and vases, the wreaths and branches, as though the abundance itself bewildered him. "My name is Samuel Carter," he said at last, as if it mattered to be known properly. "I came from the far side of town. My sister, Anna, she has been ill for weeks. The doctor says it is the lungs. She cannot walk far without coughing, and she grows weaker with each day of this cold. She loves flowers. All her life, she has loved them. I thought, perhaps, for Christmas." His voice faltered, and for a moment he seemed to be searching for words that would not sound foolish, not too small in the face of such worry. Elias listened without interruption, his gaze steady and kind. "You wish to bring her flowers," he finished softly. "Something to brighten the room and remind her that the world still holds color, even in winter." "Yes," Samuel said, relief loosening the tightness around his mouth. "Exactly that. I know it is a strange thing to ask. With the snow and the season and all, I did not think there would be anything left." "In this shop," Elias replied, allowing a faint smile to touch his lips, "there is always something left. Winter must share its stage with flowers, even if only in a small way." He gestured toward the central table where the roses and winter greens waited in their glass baths. "Tell me about your sister, Mr. Carter. What kind of colors does she favor? Does she prefer gentle shades or something more bright and bold?" Samuel's expression softened as he thought. "When we were children, she loved wildflowers most," he said slowly. "The soft, simple ones that grew by the fields. In summer, she would bring them home in her apron, and our mother would scold her for the pollen on the floor, but she never truly minded. Anna liked little things, small colors, nothing too grand." He glanced at the roses, almost uncertain they were meant for people like him. "Something modest," he added quietly. "We are not rich. I have only a little saved." Elias shook his head in gentle dismissal of the last words. "We will make something that suits her heart, not your purse," he said. "The flowers do not count coins." He moved to the table, sleeves already rolled, and reached with practiced care for a rose whose petals were soft but still full, their pale ivory shading toward the faintest blush at the edge. "This one," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else, for the quiet courage of the patient. He set the rose aside and chose a second, slightly smaller bloom, then drew from a nearby bucket a handful of delicate greenery, sprigs of fern, a slender arch of ivy, and a few fronds of fine-leaved foliage that seemed almost like lace. From the bucket of evergreens, he selected a short length of pine, the needles deep and green, carrying the scent of forests and wide air. Finally, he added a small spray of red berries, tiny and vivid, like bright thoughts in the midst of long days. As Elias assembled the bouquet, his fingers moved with unhurried precision, turning stems so that each one found its place as naturally as if it had grown there. Tomas watched from his corner, eyes following the flow of his uncle's hands, learning again how a simple bundle of flowers could speak without words. The room was very quiet, except for the occasional creak of the stove, the soft clink of glass as stems brushed the sides of the vase, and the muffled whisper of snow outside. "Tell me," Elias said softly, not looking up from his work, "what does your sister see from her window?" Samuel blinked at the question, then considered it. "The lane behind our house," he answered. "A little fence, and beyond it, the fields. In summer, you can just see the tops of the wildflowers when the wind moves through them. In winter, mostly the snow and the black lines of the hedges, sometimes the crows. Then we will bring her a memory of summer to sit beside the winter, Elias said. He tied the stems together with a narrow ribbon, the color of soft moss, his knot firm but not tight, leaving the flowers room to breathe. The bouquet was not large, but it had a quiet grace about it. The pale roses nestled among green and red, the evergreen anchoring it with its deeper tone, the small ferns lending a gentle, feathery softness. It looked, somehow, as if it had been gathered from several seasons at once. When he was done, he wrapped the stems in a square of simple brown paper, fastening it neatly with one last loop of ribbon. He held the bouquet for a moment, as if listening to it, then turned and offered it to Samuel with both hands, as one might present something fragile and precious. "For Anna," he said, "may the scent of pine remind her of open air, the roses of warmth, and the berries of small, bright days to come." Samuel took the flowers with a care bordering on reverence, his fingers brushing the paper as though he feared it might dissolve. His eyes had grown moist without his noticing, and he cleared his throat before he spoke. "This is more than I expected," he murmured. "I do not know how to thank you properly, Mr. Hart." "The thanks will be in her smile," Elias answered gently. "That is enough." He named a modest price, far lower than the value of the flowers, and when Samuel began to protest, he raised a quieting hand. "On Christmas Eve," he said softly, "we ask less of each other and give a little more. It keeps the cold outside where it belongs." Samuel pressed a few coins into his palm, still murmuring gratitude, and then pulled on his gloves with renewed energy. The weariness in his posture eased by purpose. As he reached the door, bouquet held carefully against his chest to shield it from the wind, he turned back. "I nearly kept walking," he admitted. "I told myself it was too late, that the shop would be closed, that I was foolish to hope. I am glad I was wrong." "So am I," Elias replied, and meant it more deeply than he expected. "Give your sister my good wishes, Mr. Carter. Tell her the flowers will be waiting with her for the morning." The bell chimed softly again as Samuel stepped out into the snow. A brief gust of cold air swept through the shop, then the door closed, and the warmth settled back into place. Through the glass, Elias watched the man walk away along the cobbles, his figure slowly blurring as the falling snow folded around him. The bouquet, pale against the dark of his coat, shone for a little while like a small, steadfast light. Behind him, Tomas let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding. "Uncle," he said quietly, "shall I hang the sign now?" Elias did not answer at once. He stood in the center of the shop, listening to the retreating footsteps soften into silence, feeling the echo of the visit linger among the flowers. The room seemed different now, though nothing had moved but the air. It felt somehow more awake, more attuned to the world beyond its walls. The thought of going upstairs, of closing the door firmly and shutting out the night, no longer sat quite so easily in his mind. "Not yet, Tomas," he said at last, turning away from the window with a small, thoughtful smile. "We will leave the lamps lit a while longer. There may be others who think it is too late to hope. Let us give them a chance to be wrong as well." Tomas nodded, understanding more from his uncle's tone than from the words themselves. He moved to straighten a few wreaths, his movements quiet and content, while Elias adjusted the nearest lamp, turning the flame up just a fraction. The light brightened, soft and golden, spilling out through the frosted window onto the snow-covered street, a gentle signal that the flower shop had not yet closed its heart to the night. Outside, the snow continued to fall in a peaceful, steady hush, and somewhere in the town, a clock began to chime the hour, its deep notes flowing through the calm air like a slow, reassuring breath. The long, unexpected night of open doors had quietly begun. After Samuel Carter's footsteps had dissolved into the soft hush of the snow, the shop drifted into a gentle stillness again. The decision Elias had made to keep the lamps burning a little longer, to let the door remain unlocked, settled around him in a way that felt strangely natural, as if the night itself had asked a favor, and he had simply nodded in reply. The gaslights along the street glowed a little more dimly now, their glass chimneys haloed with frost, and the sky beyond the rooftops deepened toward a velvety blue-black. Inside, the air was warm and fragrant, full of evergreen and rose and damp earth, and the faint ticking of the clock above the door measured the passing minutes with calm, unhurried strokes. Tomas moved quietly about the shop, gathering stray leaves and fallen needles into a small basket, his footsteps softened by the wooden floor. Now and then he glanced at the window, curious to see whether any other figures might appear in the drifting white. But each time he found only the gentle swirl of snow and the dim outline of the opposite houses. "Do you think anyone else will come, Uncle?" he asked at last, not in complaint, but in simple wonder. "The street looks almost empty." "Perhaps," Elias replied, as he adjusted a wreath on the wall so that its ribbon lay just so. "There are always those who think of flowers at the last moment, and there are those who do not think of them at all until something in the night reminds them." He did not elaborate on what that something might be. He had lived enough years to know it could be many things: a memory, a regret, a sudden ache of tenderness that would not be quieted. "We will wait a while and see what the evening chooses to send us." The minutes slipped by, gentle and unremarked, like flakes of snow joining the soft layers outside. Elias busied himself with small, patient tasks, trimming the stems of the remaining roses and refreshing their water, rearranging a cluster of mistletoe so that its pale berries caught the light, straightening the rolls of ribbon in their wooden drawer. These were the things that formed the quiet backbone of his days, the slow work that needed no hurry and offered, in return, a steady rhythm to his thoughts. The shop, with its familiar shapes and scents, felt like a living thing at rest, awake but calm, breathing steadily in the glow of the lamps. It was as the clock was drawing near to the hour, its hands edging closer to another slow chime, that there came another knock at the door. This one was lighter than Samuel's had been, quicker and more precise, like the tapping of a pencil on a desk when someone is thinking hard. Elias lifted his head and met Tomas's eyes for an instant. The boy's face brightened with quiet satisfaction, as if the night had proven some small promise. With the same unhurried grace as before, Elias went to the door and opened it, letting in a breath of cold air and the gentle swirl of falling snow. On the threshold stood a woman in a dark woolen coat, her hat dusted with white, a small leather satchel tucked close under one arm. Her hair, mostly hidden, showed soft threads of silver at the temples, and her face bore that particular mixture of firmness and tenderness that comes from many years spent among children. She held herself upright against the cold, but there was a gentle tiredness in her eyes, the kind that comes not from physical labor, but from carrying the invisible weight of other people's worries. When she saw the open door and the warm light flooding out, she smiled, and the lines at the corners of her eyes deepened in a way that made her seem kinder rather than older. "Good evening, Mr. Hart," she said, her breath a faint cloud in the chill between door and shop. "I feared I would find you closed. I was half prepared to scold you for working too late, and instead, it seems I am the one imposing." "Miss Whitfield," Elias replied, recognizing her at once and stepping aside to let her enter. "If you are here, then it cannot be too late. Please, come in. The night can wait a moment while we talk with the flowers." He closed the door gently behind her as she stepped inside, brushing the snow from her shoulders with a small, practical motion. Clara Whitfield had taught in the town's little schoolhouse for longer than most people could remember precisely. Generations of children had sat at her desks, traced letters under her patient guidance, recited sums in halting tones, while her calm gaze steadied them. She had never married, though she had once, long ago, known a young man who went to war and did not return. Over time, her life had found its shape in the classroom instead, in ink-stained fingers, in chalk dust on her cuffs, in the fragile, changeable worlds inside small, bright faces that watched her every day. "I was on my way home," Clara said now, unbuttoning her coat and letting the warmth of the shop ease the chill from her cheeks. "I passed by and saw your lamps still lit. It felt like an invitation I could not ignore. I hope I am not keeping you from your own Christmas Eve. You are bringing it to me," Elias answered simply. "What brings you out in this weather, Miss Whitfield? Surely your preparations are done by now." She smiled faintly. "My own, yes. But there is always one more child to remember." She set her satchel on the counter and rested her gloved hands lightly on its worn leather, as if drawing courage from the familiar object. "I have a boy in my class this year. His name is Peter Loring. He came to us from the city orphanage in the autumn then, as a reed, eyes like a stray cat, always watching, never quite believing he is safe." Her voice softened further as she spoke his name. "The other children will find apples and sweets and small gifts on their desks when they arrive after Christmas. The parents have been very generous, but Peter, there is no one to send him such things. I cannot bear the thought of his desk being the only bare one in the room." As she spoke, the image arose clearly in Elias's mind. The little schoolroom, the neat rows of desks, each one holding some small token of love, and then one empty surface like a quiet accusation. He could see the boy too, though he had never met him, shoulders drawn in, eyes studying the emptiness, trying to pretend it meant nothing, trying not to mind. He felt again that familiar tug inside, the one that had opened the door to Samuel Carter not long before. "You wish to place something on Peter's desk," he said gently. "Something small, perhaps, but bright." "Yes," Clara replied. The word carried on a breath that seemed both resolved and hopeful. "Nothing grand. I thought of a single flower with a little green around it, something that will make him pause for a moment and wonder who could have remembered him. I will not sign my name. It is enough if he feels that, somewhere, there is a warm thought with his name on it." Elias nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the table where the remaining blooms rested in their clear pools of water. "For a boy like that," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else, "we must choose something gentle, not showy, something that speaks of simple warmth." He walked to the table, his hand hovering above the flowers as if listening to them. The roses, though beautiful, felt perhaps too formal, too close to grown-up sentiments. Instead, His fingers moved toward a cluster of smaller blossoms he had sourced from a greenhouse in the district, a variety of creamy winter carnation with softly ruffled petals and a subtle, comforting scent. One bloom in particular caught his eye. Not quite perfect at first glance, its outer petals slightly uneven, but with a quiet charm that seemed to grow the longer one looked. He lifted it from the water with care, shaking a few droplets back into the vase, and turned to Clara. "This one," he said gently, "for a boy who might not trust perfection, but will recognize something that has struggled a little and is still standing." Clara stepped closer, studying the flower with a thoughtful gaze. "It is lovely," she said softly. "Not too grand, but hopeful." Elias smiled. "Hopeful will do." He moved along the table, gathering a few slender stems of greenery, a sprig of boxwood with its small, rounded leaves, a tiny branch of fir for the scent of forests and wide air, and a length of delicate, trailing ivy, its leaves small and bright. He arranged them with the carnation, turning the stems this way and that until the flower sat nestled among the greens like a quiet heart. "All this for a single desk," Clara murmured, watching his hands. "It seems almost too much." "There is no such thing as too much for a quiet child," Elias replied. "Their hearts are deep, even when they do not speak." He selected a narrow ribbon, pale blue as a winter sky in the morning, and tied it gently around the stems in a small, neat bow. The bouquet, though small enough to fit in a child's hand, seemed complete, carrying with it a sense of care that did not need many words. As he wrapped the stems in a scrap of paper to protect them from the cold, Clara's expression grew distant for a moment, thoughtful. "When I was a girl," she said, almost as if speaking to herself, "my father lost his work one winter. We had very little. There was one Christmas when the house felt so empty it almost rang with it. But on my pillow I found a single violet pressed between two scraps of paper with the words, 'For my brave girl,' in my mother's hand. It was such a small thing, and yet I have never forgotten it. I think of it every year when I see a child who has too little." She smiled, the memory softening her features further. "Perhaps this flower will be Peter's violet." "I believe it will," Elias said kindly. "Small things can echo for a very long time." He placed the little bouquet in her hands with careful formality, as if entrusting her with something delicate and important. "For Peter Loring," he added, almost like a blessing. "May he learn, slowly and gently, that the world has not entirely forgotten him." Clara took the flowers, cradling them as though they were made of something rarer than petals and stems. Her eyes shone with a quiet light. "You have always understood these matters, Mr. Hart," she said. "Perhaps that is why your shop feels warmer than most houses in winter." He shook his head with modesty. "It is the flowers, Miss Whitfield. They remember more than we do. I only listen." The price he named was so small that Clara laughed softly in protest, but he silenced her with the same gentle firmness he had used with Samuel. "Tonight," he said, "we charge only for the ribbon. The rest is a gift from the shop to your schoolroom." She accepted with grace, knowing better than to argue when kindness had taken such a clear shape. As she buttoned her coat and tucked the small bouquet safely inside her satchel, she glanced up at the clock. "I should go," she said. "There are lessons to plan, and I must be in the classroom early to arrange the desks before the children arrive. But I am glad you were still open. If the door had been dark, I think I might have carried that empty desk in my mind all night." "Then it is well we left the lamps burning a bit longer," Elias replied. "Walk carefully, Miss Whitfield. The snow hides the uneven stones." She nodded, and with a final, grateful look at the glowing shop, she stepped back out into the night. The bell chimed softly above her, and the cold air flowed in once more before the door closed gently behind her. Through the glass, Elias and Tomas watched her walk away, her figure small but steady against the pale sweep of the street, the satchel at her side holding its quiet secret of green and cream. For a few breaths, silence settled again, deeper and more contented than before. Tomas spoke first, his voice hushed. "Will the boy know it was her?" he asked. "Perhaps," Elias said. "Or perhaps he will simply know that someone was thinking of him. Sometimes that is better. A nameless kindness can feel like a blessing from the air itself." He turned back into the shop, the warmth embracing him like a gentle cloak. The lamps glowed softly over the flowers, their light now holding the memory of two small journeys, one to a sick room, one to a quiet school desk. Outside, the snow continued to fall, steady and soft, covering the town in a deeper layer of white. The hour chimed slowly from a distant steeple, and the night seemed to lean closer to the little flower shop that still shone like a patient star at the corner of the cobbled street. Inside, Elias felt no urge to reach for the closed sign. The door would remain unlocked a while longer. Somewhere in the sleeping town, he sensed, there were still stories moving toward him through the snow, carrying their small, bright needs in their hands. The evening had settled more deeply over the town, folding itself into the corners of doorways and alleys, softening edges and blurring distances. The snow no longer hurried. It drifted down in slow, thoughtful flakes, each one turning in the gaslight before joining the growing whiteness along the cobbled street. In the flower shop, the lamps glowed with a steady, gentle light, casting warm pools over the wooden floor and turning the glass vases into quiet columns of pale gold. The air was still thick with the scent of pine, damp earth, and faint sweetness, and the walls held the soft memory of voices that had passed through only moments before. Elias moved with unhurried steps between table and counter, straightening a wreath here, turning a vase there, as if smoothing the sheets on a bed before sleep. Tomas had grown quieter as the evening lengthened, his earlier energy softened by the slow rhythm of the night. He perched on a stool near the workbench, carefully polishing a pair of metal shears with a piece of linen, his hands busy so that his thoughts could drift. "Uncle," he said at length, breaking a companionable silence, "do you suppose they are home now? Mr. Carter and his sister, and Miss Whitfield with her boy's flower?" Elias smiled faintly as he moved a basket of pine cones nearer to the front, where their rounded shapes could catch the light. "I imagine Mr. Carter has just opened the door to his house," he replied, his voice low and calm. "His sister will smell the pine before she sees the roses. As for Miss Whitfield, I think she will sit a moment at her kitchen table, the flower beside her, before she tucks it away for Peter's desk. She will plan her lessons with the scent of fir keeping her company." Tomas nodded, apparently content with that image. The shop fell silent again, but it was not an empty silence. It felt full of unseen journeys, of small bouquets traveling through the snow to their waiting places. Outside, the street lay mostly deserted now, save for the occasional figure hurrying past with head bent against the cold, or the distant shape of a carriage making its way homeward. The town had begun its quiet inward turning, families drawing together around their lamps and stoves, doors closing softly against the winter night. The clock above the door ticked on, its hands drawing steadily closer to the next hour. Elias glanced at it only once, more out of habit than concern. The thought of closing no longer pressed at him with the same insistence. Instead, it lingered in the background like a task postponed for reasons that did not need explaining. He felt, as he sometimes did, that he was keeping watch for something, though he could not have said exactly what. It was near this hour, when the street outside seemed as empty as it was likely to be, and the snow fell in quiet, silver patterns, that the door shuddered beneath a sudden gust of wind, and the bell gave a small, accidental chime. For a moment, Elias thought it was only the weather, but then came a firm, practical knock, brisk and unembellished, like the rap of knuckles on a wooden beam in a workshop. He crossed the floor with his usual unhurried step and opened the door. A sharper breath of cold rushed in, carrying with it the smell of smoke and iron, and in the doorway stood a man wrapped in a heavy, well-worn coat, his cap pulled low against the falling snow. The man's face was ruddy from the cold, lines of soot marking traces along his jaw and forehead, as if he had brushed away sweat with a work-blackened hand. His eyes, however, were clear and steady, and though fatigue lay beneath them, there was an alertness in his gaze that spoke of long nights spent awake for others' sake. He smelled faintly of coal smoke and damp wool, and behind him, in the distance, there was the faint suggestion of rising steam from the rail yard or the shadowed structures near the gasworks. "Evening, Mr. Hart," he said, his voice deep and a little rough, as though he was accustomed to calling out against the noise of engines or the rumble of machinery. "It's Henry Dalton. I hope I'm not too late. I saw your lamps from the foot of the street and took a chance." "Mr. Dalton," Elias answered warmly, standing aside at once. "You are not too late for anything that involves green things. Please, come in. The snow has been busy out there." Henry stepped inside with a small, grateful sigh as the warmth touched his chilled face. He stamped his boots lightly on the mat to rid them of clinging snow and removed his cap, revealing hair flattened by the damp and a faint rim of frost along the edge of his collar. "I'm on my way to the works," he explained, glancing around the shop as if reluctant to track the outside world into such softness. "Night shift. They've put me on until morning to keep an eye on the lines and the lamps. I told myself I'd go straight through, not stop for anything, but then I thought of home." Elias recognized the look in the man's eye, that quiet pull toward a small house waiting at the end of long hours. "Your house, or someone in it?" he asked gently, already knowing the answer. Henry's mouth curved into a tired but genuine smile. "My wife, Ruth," he said. "The house and she are much the same thing, really. It's a small place, down past the mill, but she keeps it bright as she can. Only, we've had a hard year. Work's been uncertain, and the baby, our little one, came early in the spring and did not stay long." He paused, the words hanging briefly between them like something fragile that needed to be set down carefully. "Ruth has been good, steady, braver than I. But the nights when I'm away and the lamps are low, the house can feel very empty for her." He cleared his throat softly, as if smoothing out the grief. "I thought, if I could bring a bit of evergreen for her, nothing grand, just a few branches to put in the jug on the table, it might make the room feel less bare. Something green to look at when I'm at the works, and she's alone with her thoughts." Elias listened with that deep, unhurried attention that made even the roughest words sound like part of a quiet story. "A little house of evergreen," he said thoughtfully. "Yes, I think the shop can manage that." He gestured toward the tall vases near the window, where fir and pine and spruce stood like small, patient trees, waiting for their next life. "Come, Mr. Dalton. We will build something that carries the feeling of the woods into your home." Henry followed him to the vases, his heavy boots surprisingly careful on the floorboards. Tomas watched from near the workbench, his eyes bright with interest. He had seen Henry once or twice before at a distance, tending the gas lamps near the station or walking along the tracks with a lantern swinging from his hand like a small wandering star. To see him here, in the soft light among roses and ribbons, felt like watching a night watchman step unexpectedly into a dream. Elias took up his shears and began selecting branches with the same calm deliberation he gave to roses and rare hothouse blooms. He chose a length of dark fir, its needles dense and fragrant, then a branch of lighter pine whose long needles gave a sense of movement, like wind passing through a forest. He added a sprig of spruce, its bluish tint lending a quiet depth to the green, and finally, a few cuttings of glossy holly with bright red berries glowing like embers. As he arranged them in his hands, turning the stems until they sat comfortably together, the bundle took on the shape of a small, upright bouquet of winter, sturdy and modest, yet undeniably alive. "How big is your table?" Elias asked, not looking up as he adjusted a sprig of holly so that its berries peeped from the green rather than shouting from it. Henry considered. "Not very," he said. "Just enough for 2 plates and a loaf of bread, if we're lucky. Ruth keeps a cloth on it, though, with little blue flowers stitched around the edges. She says it makes simple food taste better." "Then we must not overshadow her flowers," Elias replied. "This will do." He tied the stems firmly with a length of twine, binding them into a sturdy cluster that could stand easily in a jug or jar without needing more than a little water. The evergreens, pressed close together, looked almost like a miniature forest scene, the holly berries shining like small lanterns hung in the branches. He might have stopped there. Henry had asked for nothing more, but as Elias turned to lay the little bundle on the counter, his gaze fell on the remaining roses. Their pale heads bowed slightly, as if listening to the murmur of the evening. One in particular caught his attention, a creamy bloom whose outer petals were beginning to show the faintest touch of age, a soft curling at the edges, but whose center still held a rich, quiet glow. It was a flower that another customer might overlook in favor of something more perfect, but to Elias, it looked like something that had seen a season and endured it gracefully. Without quite deciding, he lifted the rose and held it briefly beneath the lamp, watching the light gather in its layered heart. Then, with care, he slipped the stem down among the evergreens so that the bloom rose just above the dark green, like a small, pale moon rising between trees. The contrast was gentle and vivid at once, and it changed the character of the bundle entirely. What had been simply a cluster of branches became, with the addition of that one flower, a message. Henry watched, his eyes fixed on the rose. "That makes it, well, that makes it something special," he said slowly. "I hadn't thought to ask for anything like that. I don't know if—" Elias shook his head, the movement calm and final. "The rose is my gift," he said. "She has traveled through many days to reach this night. I think she has earned the right to rest in a warm room." He looked up and met Henry's gaze with a steady kindness. When you give this to your wife, tell her that the green is for her steadfastness, and the rose is for the love that is still there, even on the hardest nights. Tell her that someone who has never met her believes she has been very brave. For a moment, Henry said nothing. The roughness in his features softened, and he blinked once, as if the warmth of the shop had touched more than his skin. "She has been," he murmured, "brave. I've not always found the right words to tell her so." He reached out and took the bundle with surprising gentleness, his large, work-roughened hands cradling the stems as if they were made of something delicate. "Perhaps this will say it better." Elias named a price that reflected only the evergreen and holly, leaving the rose untouched by coin. Henry reached into his pocket and produced a few carefully folded notes and coins, his fingers lingering a moment on one coin before he set it down, as if considering keeping it back and then choosing not to. "It's more than fair," he said quietly. "You've given me more than I came for." "The night will be long," Elias replied, "but knowing there is a small forest and a rose waiting at home may make it feel shorter." He wrapped the base of the bouquet in a scrap of sacking to catch the melting snow and handed it back. "Keep it upright if you can. The rose will appreciate it." Henry smiled, a slow, grateful curve that seemed to lift some of the weariness from his face. "I'll take care," he promised. "And when I'm walking the lines tonight, I'll think of this little house of green on the table and Ruth sitting beside it. That will be a good thought to carry with me." He replaced his cap, tugging it down against the cold, and moved toward the door. At the threshold, he paused and glanced back. "I suppose most folk are closing by now," he said, "but I'm glad you weren't. The lamps in your window look like something a man can steer toward when the night feels a bit too big." "That is exactly what they are," Elias answered softly. "Walk safely, Mr. Dalton, and may your lamps burn steady through the dark." With that, Henry stepped out into the snow, the bell chiming gently above him. The door closed behind his solid figure, and once again the sharp breath of winter was shut out, replaced by the hushed warmth of the shop. Through the glass, Elias and Thomas watched him stride away toward the edge of town, the bundle of evergreen and the solitary rose held close to his chest like a lantern he was carrying home. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence felt deeper now, enriched by the little stories that had passed through it. At last, Thomas said, very softly, "I did not know a few branches and one flower could hold so much." "They always could," Elias replied, turning down one of the lamps just a fraction, so that the light softened to a more intimate glow. "We only notice it more on nights like this, when the world is quiet enough to listen." Outside, the snow continued its slow, peaceful descent, wrapping houses, roofs, and rails in a gentle, muffling blanket. The town lay in its winter sleep, but the flower shop at the corner still shone in the darkness, a small, steadfast heart of green and light, waiting without hurry for whoever might next step in from the cold. As the hours folded one into another, the night outside grew more settled, more certain of itself. The early bustle of Christmas Eve had long since ebbed away, leaving behind a quieter, more intimate stillness in the streets. The snow, which had begun the day in fits and starts, had now found its rhythm, drifting down steadily in soft, silver whispers, layering the cobblestones and the rooftops, rounding off sharp edges and filling in the hollows between stones. The gas lamps flickered gently along the street, their halos blurred by the fine, floating flakes, and in the distance, the faint outline of the church steeple stood against the dark sky like a patient, watching figure. Inside the flower shop, time seemed to move differently, slower, deeper, like water in a sheltered pool. The lamps cast their warm circles of light, turning the green of the evergreens into rich, shadowed forests, and the pale petals of the roses into quiet moons resting in clear glass. The air was thick with the gentle fragrances that had gathered throughout the day. Pine, damp soil, the soft spice of dried orange, the subtle sweetness of blossoms kept alive against the season's will. Elias moved from one small task to another, not with the urgency of work, but with the calm attentiveness of someone who understands that even in stillness, there are things to be done. Tomas, who had been fighting a slow, persistent drowsiness, had settled on the stool behind the counter, his elbows resting on the polished wood, his chin propped in his hands. His eyes followed his uncle's movements with a heavy-lidded focus, and now and then he blinked himself back into full wakefulness, unwilling to miss even a moment of this unusual night. "It feels different," he murmured once, watching the way the lamplight trembled on the glass vases, as if the town is sleeping, but the shop is dreaming. Elias paused to consider the image and gave a faint, approving smile. "A quiet dream," he agreed, "a gentle one, full of green things." His gaze drifted to the front window, where faint shapes of snowflakes clung and melted, tracing slow paths downward like thoughts that would not quite stay. Beyond the glass, the street lay almost empty, the white surface disturbed only by a few sets of footprints and the faint, parallel lines of carriage wheels that had passed some time before. It might have been easy in such a moment to believe that no one else would come, that the evening stories had all been told. But Elias had lived long enough to know that certain visitors came not in the busy light of day, but in the softened hours when the rest of the world had turned inward. There were rituals that belonged to the night and to the solitude of those who observed them. So when the bell above the door gave a delicate, chiming note without any knock at all, a gentle sound, as if the door had been opened with reverent care, he was not surprised. He turned and saw, standing just inside the threshold, a small, straight-backed woman, her shawl dusted with snow, and her gloved hands folded neatly over the handle of a walking stick. "Good evening, Mr. Hart," she said in a voice that was quiet but steady, the words shaped by long habit. "I hope I find you open still. I would not like to think of this night without my errand." "Mrs. Merrill," Elias replied, bowing his head slightly in greeting. "You find us very much open. The lamps have been waiting for you." Agnes Merrill stepped further into the shop, closing the door behind her with a soft click. She was not large in stature, but something about the way she held herself made her seem taller, as though grief and endurance had drawn her up rather than bowed her down. Her hair, once dark, was now almost entirely white, gathered neatly at the nape of her neck beneath her bonnet. Her face bore the fine lines of many winters and many thoughts, but her eyes were clear and precise, the gray of distant hills under snow. She loosened her shawl with a small, practiced motion and brushed a few lingering flakes from the edge of her sleeve. "I saw your light from the corner," she said, her gaze moving slowly across the familiar shapes of the shop. "It is a comfort, Mr. Hart, to know that some things do not change. I could almost believe it was 10, 15 years ago." "In here," Elias answered, "time walks more slowly than outside. The flowers do their best to hold it in place." He moved toward her with the unspoken understanding of many such visits. "You have come for your Christmas bouquet." "Yes," she replied simply, "the same as every year." There was no need to say more. They both knew the shape of this ritual as well as they knew their own names. For as long as Elias could remember, Agnes Merrill had come to the shop on Christmas Eve, arriving sometime between the falling of twilight and the rise of the first stars. She would ask, always in the same quiet way, for a bouquet for the grave of her husband, Thomas Merrill, who had died many years before. In the early years, when the loss was still sharp and fresh, she had spoken more of him, of his laughter, his way of walking, his habit of whistling under his breath as he came up the lane. Over time, the words had grown fewer, but the bouquet remained the same. Evergreen for constancy, white flowers for remembrance, a small touch of red for the love that still lived on in her. Elias guided her toward the central table, where the winter flowers waited like gentle thoughts. "We shall make it just as we did last year," he said softly, "and the year before that, and the year before that." "I remember." "I know you do," Agnes answered, and there was a quiet gratitude in the way she said it. For someone whose life had been profoundly altered by absence, it mattered that someone else remembered too, that her husband's name was not kept alive only in her own mind. He began with the evergreens, choosing them with particular care. A firm branch of fir, its needles rich and dark, a length of pine that carried a vivid scent of forest air, a small piece of yew, its deeper, almost shadowed green, bringing a note of solemnity. He arranged them in his hand until they formed a steady base, like a small evergreen hillside. Then he turned to the flowers, selecting, as he did every year, 3 white blossoms. This year, they were the winter carnations, ruffled and soft. Their creamy petals touched at the edges with the faintest suggestion of frost-kissed ivory. He nestled them among the greens, one slightly higher than the others, as if the 3 were conversing quietly together. Finally, he took a sprig of berries, a modest cluster, not as bright as holly, but with a gentle, dusky red, like embers that had burned through long into the night. He slipped it into the heart of the bouquet, just enough to show, not loud, but unmistakable. The arrangement, though simple, held within it the same careful balance it always had: life and remembrance, winter's stillness, and the trace of warmth that had once been fire. As he worked, Agnes watched in silence, her expression focused and distant at once. Her gloved fingers rested lightly on the top of her walking stick, as if anchoring her to the present moment, while her thoughts moved elsewhere. "It was snowing the night Thomas died," she said quietly after a time, speaking not as if beginning a story, but as if resuming a long conversation they both knew. "Not like this. The flakes were larger, heavier. The wind from the river was sharp. I remember thinking the snow looked almost cruel, covering everything so quickly." She paused, eyes following the movement of Elias's hands. "Now I find I like the snow better. It feels kinder. It softens the edges of things." Elias did not reply at once. He had learned long ago that some memories needed room around them, space in which to breathe without being answered. He tied the stems together with a length of dark green ribbon, his fingers moving with the ease of repetition, and only when the bow was settled did he speak. "The years do their work on us," he said softly. "They dull some pains, sharpen others, but they also teach us to see the gentle parts of what once felt harsh." Agnes's lips curved into a faint, rueful smile. "Yes," she said, "I used to rage at the cold, at the way it took his breath from him. Now I think of the snow as a blanket over him, keeping him company until I come. It is a foolish thought, perhaps, but it is a peaceful one. There is nothing foolish about a peaceful thought, Elias replied. He wrapped the bouquet in simple paper, leaving the blossoms and part of the greenery exposed, as he had done so many times on this night. He cradled the finished arrangement in both hands for a brief moment, then turned and offered it to her with a quiet formality that felt almost ceremonial. "For Mr. Thomas Merrill," he said, as always. She took the bouquet with great care, her hands steady despite the years. For a moment, she held it close, her gaze resting on the white flowers as if they were words she was reading in a familiar letter. The lamplight gleamed softly on the petals, turning them into little islands of brightness above the deeper green. He liked white, she said, more to herself than to Elias. He used to say they looked like stars that had come down to rest in a field. "Then he will have his stars," Elias answered. She looked up at him then, and in her eyes there was a depth that came from the accumulation of many winters, many visits, many small acts repeated until they felt like a bridge between worlds. "You have made this bouquet for me every year since he passed," she said quietly. "You have never changed it, not truly. No matter what flowers you had in your shop, it is always this, always just right. That matters to me more than you know." "It is the least I can do," he replied. "There are not many things we can hold steady in this world. A bouquet is a small thing, but if it can be a fixed point in the turning of the years, then it has done good work." She reached into the small reticule at her wrist and drew out a purse, counting out the coins with practiced precision. Elias named the same price he always did, modest, unchanged by time or by the fluctuations of supply. She paid without protest. They had long ago set aside the need to negotiate. Money, in this exchange, was only a formality, something to satisfy the world's practical demands while leaving the true value undiscussed. When the coins had been put away and the bouquet was safely in her grasp, Agnes drew her shawl more closely around her shoulders and moved toward the door. "The path will be a little deep by now," she said, casting a brief glance at the snow beyond the glass. "But I know the way. I could walk it with my eyes closed." "I believe you could," Elias said gently, "but keep them open all the same. The stones can be treacherous beneath the snow." He stepped forward and opened the door for her, letting in a gentle breath of cold air. "Will you go to the church first, or straight to the cemetery?" "Straight there," she replied. "The vicar will understand." Thomas never liked a fuss. He preferred the quiet places. She paused on the threshold and turned back, her gaze meeting his. "Thank you, Mr. Hart, for remembering with me." "Always, Mrs. Merrill," he said. "Safe walk and a peaceful night." She nodded once, then stepped out into the snow, her boots making soft impressions on the white surface. The bouquet she held stood out against the dark wool of her coat, the white flowers and deep green vivid even in the muted light. As she made her way along the street, her figure slowly grew smaller, the path behind her marked by a neat line of footprints leading toward the churchyard and the quiet stones beyond. The snow fell gently around her, resting on her shawl, catching on the edges of the bouquet, softening the world into a hushed, silver stillness. For a long moment, Elias and Thomas remained by the window, watching her progress in silence. There was something deeply moving in the sight of that solitary figure, following the same path she had taken every year, carrying the same flowers to the same place, weaving her grief and her love into the very snow beneath her feet. At last, when her form had blurred into the soft white distance, Elias turned away from the window, drawing the door closed with a quiet finality. The shop's warmth enfolded them once more, the lamplight pooling gently over the flowers and ribbons and evergreen branches. The clock ticked on, unhurried and steady, marking another small portion of this long, unexpected night. "Does it make you sad?" Tomas asked in a low voice, still standing close to the glass. "Watching her go like that, every year?" Elias thought for a moment, his gaze moving over the familiar interior of the shop. "It makes me feel humbled," he said at last, "to see how love can walk the same path again and again, through snow and years, and not grow smaller. There is sadness in it, yes, but also something very strong and very gentle." He rested his hand briefly on his nephew's shoulder. "We are fortunate, Tomas, to be the ones who place flowers in such stories." The boy nodded slowly, absorbing this. The shop settled into stillness once more, but it was a stillness enriched by the memory of Agnes Merrill's quiet steps, by the thought of the white flowers resting now against dark stone under their blanket of snow. Outside, the night deepened further, the town sleeping more soundly under its soft silver cover, while the little flower shop remained awake, its windows shining softly like thoughtful eyes, keeping watch over the dreaming street. After Agnes Merrill's small, determined figure had vanished into the gentle white distance, the shop settled into a deeper quiet, the kind that seems to arrive only after certain doors have closed and certain words have been spoken. The echoes of the widow's yearly ritual lingered in the warm air like a faint, steady fragrance, blending with the sense of evergreen and damp earth. Elias moved through the shop with an even more measured calm, as if the night itself had grown slower, and each gesture deserved a little more care. He trimmed a stray stem here, straightened a wreath there, and paused now and then to listen to the soft ticking of the clock and the distant, muffled hush of the snow beyond the glass. Tomas, though still unwilling to yield entirely to sleep, had shifted into a quieter state of wakefulness, the restless edges of youth smoothed by the hour and the lamplight. He had dragged a crate near the stove and sat upon it with his back against the wall, the borrowed warmth seeping through his coat in a way that made his eyelids heavier. In his hands, he held a length of twine, which he wound and unwound between his fingers without quite thinking about it. "Uncle," he said softly, his voice low so as not to disturb the peace that had grown around them. "Do all Christmas Eves feel like this to you?" Elias considered the question as he set a small pot of water on the stove to warm. "No," he said at last, with gentle honesty. "Some are busier, some are lonelier, some pass almost like any other night. But this one," he glanced around at the softly glowing shop, the empty floor, the ready, waiting flowers. "This one is different. It has the feeling of a story that knows it is being told." Tomas smiled faintly at that, letting the twine slip from his fingers. His head tipped back against the wall, and for a moment his eyes closed of their own accord. The stove hummed with quiet heat, and the faint rattle of the window pane beneath the snow-laden wind became a kind of distant lullaby. The town outside seemed to have sunk into its deepest sleep, the few remaining carriages now gone, the footsteps of latecomers silenced beneath the thickening blanket of white. It was in this softened hour, when the night felt thick and still and complete, that the sound of wheels reached them a low, muffled rumble, distinct from the earlier clatter of familiar local carts. This sound was more rhythmic, smoother, with the faint jingle of finer harness and the sharper ring of metal on stone beneath the cushion of snow. Elias lifted his head, listening. The noise grew nearer, then slowed, and finally stopped outside the shop with a gentle, controlled jolt. A moment later came the quiet creak of a carriage door, followed by the soft thud of boots descending to the street. The bell above the door chimed in a clear, silver note as it opened, letting a breath of cold and a swirl of snow into the warm shop. Elias turned toward it, and Tomas, roused from the edge of sleep, blinked his eyes open, straightening where he sat. In the doorway stood a young woman wrapped in a city coat of good, if modest, quality, the dark fabric lined with fur along the collar and cuffs. Her hat, stylish but not ostentatious, sat slightly askew from the journey, and a veil of thin snowflakes clung to its brim like a delicate lace. She stepped inside with a soft rustle of skirts, closing the door carefully behind her as if she were afraid of disturbing something fragile in the air. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes bright and alert under dark, neatly arched brows. She carried herself with the easy assurance of someone used to busy streets and crowded rooms. But there was a faint tension in her shoulders, a reserve around her mouth that suggested the comfort she wore in the city did not sit quite as naturally on her here. For a moment, she simply stood, letting the warmth settle around her, and her gaze made a slow, searching journey around the shop, as if she were comparing what she saw to an image she had kept for a long time in her mind. "Good evening," Elias said, taking a step forward, his tone as calm and welcoming as if this were the first hour of the day rather than the deep middle of the night. "You have come a long way through the snow, I think." She smiled at that, a small, genuine curve of the lips that softened her whole face. "From the late train," she replied. "The station was nearly deserted, and I told the driver to take me straight here before my father's house. I feared you would be closed." She paused, then added, a note of old familiarity threading through the measured city cadence of her speech. "You are still Mr. Hart, are you not?" "I am," Elias answered. He studied her more closely now. The line of her jaw, the set of her eyes, the faint, familiar tilt of her head as she regarded the flowers. Somewhere in the patterns of her features, he felt a stirring of recognition, like a melody half remembered. "And you, if I am not mistaken, are Miss Margaret Ashford. You used to come in holding tightly to your mother's hand, determined to choose your own ribbon and never quite satisfied with red." Her eyes brightened with startled pleasure. "You remember," she said softly. "I was not sure you would. It has been, nearly 15 years, I suppose. Some faces are tied to certain flowers in my mind," Elias replied. "Yours is bound up with small winter bouquets and long deliberations over the proper shade of blue." Margaret laughed quietly, the sound light and edged with nostalgia. "Yes," she said, "blue. My mother used to say I wanted the sky on the stems, even in December." She took a step further into the shop, her gloved hand trailing briefly along the edge of the counter. The lamplight touched her profile, revealing, beneath the controlled composure of the city woman, the echo of the child she had been. "I have been living in the city these past 8 years," she continued. "There is so much noise there, so many windows and lights, and people always in a hurry. There are flower sellers too, on corners and in shop fronts, but they all feel busy, temporary, not like this. She gave a small shake of her head, sending a few lingering flakes from her hat to melt on the floor. When the firm granted me leave for Christmas, I found myself thinking not of the big shops on the boulevards, but of this one, of the way it smelled at this time of year. The scent is much the same, Elias said gently, green and damp and willing to remember. He moved to the central table and rested his hand on the edge, inviting her closer. "What can we do for you tonight, Miss Ashford?" She hesitated, as if embarrassed by the size of the wish she was about to express. When she spoke, her voice had softened, losing a little of the practiced crispness it had carried before. "My mother is older now," she said. "Her hands ache in the cold, and she does not come into town as she once did. But every Christmas when I was small, she would bring me here on Christmas Eve. She would say, 'Come, Maggie, let us fetch a bit of winter magic for the house.' We would choose a bouquet, always the same in its way, though you might have thought it changed each year." She smiled faintly. "I want to bring her that bouquet again, exactly as it was, if your memory and your flowers will allow it. I want, for one evening, to be the girl who walked home beside her, with the paper rustling in my arms." Elias's gaze grew distant for a heartbeat as he reached back through his mind. He could see Margaret as she had been, a thin-legged girl in a coat a little too big for her, reaching on tiptoe to peer at the flowers. Her mother, Helen Ashford, with her quiet, intelligent eyes standing just behind her, letting the child take the lead. He remembered the particular shape Helen always chose, not too large, not too heavy, something bright enough to gladden a small sitting room, but not so extravagant as to speak of waste. "Yes," he said, the word more an exhalation of certainty than a simple answer. "I remember your mother's Christmas bouquet." He turned toward the vases, his hands already reaching. "She favored a cluster of white and red, if I recall, with enough green to smell of the woods, and always, always a touch of blue for you." Margaret let out a soft breath that sounded very much like relief. "Yes," she whispered. "That is it, exactly." He began with the evergreens, as he nearly always did in winter. A firm spray of pine, its long needles catching the light with a soft, silvery sheen. A shorter piece of fir for depth and richness of scent. A tiny sprig of cedar for its fan-like elegance. He layered them in his hand until they formed a gentle fan of green, not too tall, not too compact. Then he turned to the flowers. From the bucket of roses, he chose one deep red bloom, its petals velvety and full, the rich color glowing warmly under the lamps. Beside it, he placed a white rose, not pure as snow but tinged delicately with cream, the contrast between them like a candle's flame against fresh linen. To these he added 2 of the winter carnations, their ruffled petals in a soft, rosy hue that bridged the space between white and red. He arranged them so that the white and red roses sat slightly apart, the smaller flowers cradling them without crowding. Finally, he went to the drawer of ribbons and opened it, the familiar sight of rolled colors, waiting like careful notes in a song. His fingers moved past red and gold and green, searching until they found a spool of blue faded a little from years of unwinding, but still clear and true. It was not a loud blue, but a gentle one, like the sky just after sunset when the first stars begin to appear. He lifted it and held it briefly up to the light. "This," he said, glancing at Margaret, "if I am not mistaken," Her eyes shone, and she nodded. "That is the color," she said. "I remember the way it looked against the green when we laid the bouquet on the mantel." Elias tied the stems with practiced care, the blue ribbon winding around them in a snug, precise knot, the ends trailing just enough to soften the line. The bouquet that emerged from his hands looked, to his eye, both familiar and newly alive. Winter's deep green, the rich and pale faces of the roses, the softer hues in between, all bound together by that slender band of sky-colored silk. He cradled it a moment, testing its balance, then turned and offered it to her with both hands. Margaret took it as if receiving something from far away, her fingers closing gently around the paper-wrapped stems. For a moment, she did not speak. She simply looked down at the arrangement, her face lit by a mixture of wonder and something almost like grief, softened by gratitude. "It is the same," she said at last, her voice scarcely more than a breath. "I could almost swear it is the same bouquet I carried when I was 9 years old. I can see myself in the reflection of the shop window, then and now." "Some things change more slowly than others," Elias replied. "Your mother will recognize it." "I hope so," she whispered. "She says she does not remember as clearly as she used to. Names slip and dates, and sometimes she looks at the city streets as if they are a story she has been told rather than a place she walked. But perhaps this." She lifted the bouquet slightly, inhaling the mingled scents. "Perhaps this will take her back to the little house on Birch Lane, to the narrow mantelpiece and the candles, and my father humming carols out of tune." "It may," Elias said. "Flowers are travelers of the mind. They carry us backward and forward more gently than words can." He named a price that was fair but not burdensome. She paid it without hesitation, her city earnings steady enough to make the coins come easily. Yet he saw, in the way she smoothed the paper around the stems, that the true cost and value of the bouquet lay elsewhere, in rooms and memories and the shape of a daughter's longing. As she buttoned her coat and adjusted her scarf, preparing to step back into the night, she looked around the shop once more. "Thank you, Mr. Hart," she said quietly, "for remembering us, for being the same in the best ways." "The shop remembers," he answered. "I only listen to it." He opened the door for her, and the cold air wrapped gently around them, bringing with it the quiet of the sleeping town. "Give your mother my regards, Miss Ashford. Tell her that the flowers have missed her." A small, shining tear trembled at the edge of Margaret's eye, but she blinked it away with a practiced city composure. "I will," she promised. "Good night." She stepped out onto the snow-covered street, the bouquet held close to her chest, the blue ribbon peeking from the paper like a slip of sky against the dark of her coat. The carriage driver, waiting patiently by the curb, hurried to open the door for her, and in another moment she had vanished inside, taking with her the scents and colors of the little shop. The carriage wheels began to turn again, leaving shallow grooves in the fresh snow as it moved away toward the quieter end of town where the Ashford house still stood. Elias closed the door gently, the bell's chime fading into the familiar hum of warmth and lamplight. He turned back toward the shop, feeling the night around him deepen yet further, enriched now by the image of a mother and daughter reunited over a remembered bouquet. Tomas, still seated near the stove, watched his uncle with drowsy admiration. Outside, the town lay wrapped in its peaceful white cloak, and inside, The flower shop glowed on, poised at the edge of midnight, holding in its walls the gentle stories of those who had passed through its door. Midnight came softly to the town, so gently that there was no exact moment when one could have said, "Now the day is past." Instead, the hours folded over one another with quiet hands, evening deepening into night, and night into something stiller and more inward. The snow had grown finer, almost powder now, a soft, silvery dust that drifted down in threads and curls, catching the gaslight and the faint glimmer of distant stars. The narrow street outside the flower shop lay in a hush so complete that even the rare sound of a distant door closing or a late carriage passing seemed to belong more to memory than to the present. Roofs, windowsills, and lampposts wore smooth white caps, and the steps leading up to front doors had almost disappeared beneath the soft weight of the weather. Inside Heart and Bloom's, the air was warm and still, holding the gathered sense of the day as a shell holds the sound of the sea. The lamps burned a little lower now, their flames turned down with deliberate care, so that the light was gentle rather than bright. Shadows had grown in the corners and along the ceiling beams, not heavy or menacing, but soft and velvety, like folds of dark cloth wrapped around the room. The glass vases shone in muted tones, the water within them glinting here and there where a lamp caught the surface, the stems inside like pale green lines drawn through liquid amber. Tomas had finally surrendered to his own weariness. It had happened slowly, almost tenderly, as if the night itself had laid a hand on his eyes and asked them to close. After Margaret Ashford's carriage had disappeared into the drifting snow, he had tried valiantly to keep awake, straightening a row of ribbons that did not truly need straightening, counting the wreaths on the wall, polishing the same brass vase twice. But the warmth of the stove and the soft repetition of gentle tasks had worked together like a lullaby, and his head had begun to nod in small, involuntary dips. Elias had watched this gradual surrender with a quiet indulgence that held both affection and understanding. At last, he had set down the shears he was cleaning and crossed to his nephew's side. "Come," he had said in that calm, unhurried voice that seemed never to startle. "You have done enough for one day. Christmas Eve will still be here in the morning, and the flowers will not mind if you sleep while they stand watch." Tomas had started to protest, but the words came out already blurred at the edges. Elias had taken up an old woolen coat that hung upon a peg and spread it over a stack of flattened crates near the stove, making a sort of narrow, improvised bed. He added a folded length of sacking for a pillow and gestured toward it with a mild finality that allowed no argument. Within a few minutes, Tomas was lying there, curled on his side, his hands tucked under his cheek, his face slackened into the soft openness of deep sleep. The glow from the nearest lamp touched his dark hair and the curve of his shoulder, and the shadows beyond him gathered close in a protective ring. Now, some time later, the boy slept on, his breathing slow and even, a barely audible rhythm that mingled with the quiet sounds of the shop, the ticking clock, the faint creak of settling wood, the occasional soft sigh of the stove as it adjusted its heat. Every now and then he shifted slightly, as if turning in some gentle dream, but he did not wake. Elias moved about the room with extra care, his steps almost soundless, his hands mindful of any clink or scrape that might disturb the fragile peace of the sleeper. These hours, when the town was at rest and the flower shop alone seemed fully awake, had always held a particular character for Elias. He could remember other nights like this, though none had unfolded quite as this one had. There had been years when he had closed early, barring the door and climbing the narrow stairs to sit in the small parlor above, listening to the bells alone. There had been the long, quiet winters after Maria's passing, when he had sat by the window with a book lying open but unread on his lap, watching the snow in the lamplight and wondering how a room could feel so still and yet so full of absence. There had been nights when the wind had howled along the roofs and rattled the panes, and others when the air outside had been as still and clear as glass. Tonight, however, he found that he was grateful to remain below, in the shop itself, the living heart of his days. It felt right that the flowers should not be left alone in the dark, that the stories they had gathered should not be sealed away too soon. So he stayed, moving slowly among them, tending to the small acts of care that could not wait until morning. He began with the roses. Their stems had been standing in the vases since afternoon, drinking what water they could draw from the clear depths. Now he lifted each bloom in turn, supporting the head gently with his fingertips, and examined the cut end of each stem. Where the fibers had begun to cloud or close, he trimmed a slender slice away with his knife, giving the rose a fresh mouth to drink from. The soft snick of the blade was almost inaudible, yet in the stillness it seemed distinct, the sound of renewal. Each stem, newly cut, sent the faintest trace of green scent into the surrounding air, like a sigh of relief. He slid them back into the water, spacing them so that no petal was crowded, no leaf crushed. From the roses he moved to the evergreen branches. They did not ask as much, content to stand in their buckets and vases, the sap within them patient and slow. Still, he checked the water levels, topping them up where needed, his hand steady as he poured from a chipped earthen jug. Droplets fell sometimes on the wooden floor, catching the lamplight before disappearing into small, darkened spots that would soon dry. He gently shook loose any snow that had clung to a branch near the door, and where a needle had fallen, he brushed it aside with the soft sole of his shoe. Not in haste, but as part of the slow tidying the night seemed to request. At intervals, his gaze would drift toward the window. In the glass, he saw not only the snow outside and the dim halo of the nearest lamp, but also the reflection of the shop within, a faint, watery echo of wreaths and vases and tables, and of himself moving quietly through them. When he stood in a certain position, Maria's photograph on the far wall appeared doubled in the glass, as though she were looking out on the night as well, her summer smile superimposed upon the winter scene. He did not dwell on this, nor did he shy away from it. It was simply one more layer in the gentle palimpsest of memory that the night had laid over everything. Once, when he paused at the counter to rest his hands for a moment, he let himself lean against the wood and simply listen. At first, he heard only the familiar noises of the shop, but then, gradually, other sounds drifted in from the sleeping town. Somewhere far off, perhaps down by the river or the rail yard, a whistle blew a low, sustained note, like a distant animal calling in its sleep. A dog barked once, half-heartedly, then fell silent. The church clock, invisible from here but always present, began to strike the hour, its slow, measured tones rolling gently through the air, slightly muffled by the snow, yet still dignified and clear. 1, 2, 3. Elias counted silently, his lips barely moving, until the last bell had sounded, and its vibrations faded into the quiet. He wondered who else might be awake to hear it. Henry Dalton walking his rounds with his lantern, perhaps Miss Whitfield at her small desk, placing the little carnation in a cup of water before sleep, Samuel Carter sitting by his sister's bed, watching her breathe. In some farmhouse outside the town, a child might have woken for a moment and listened drowsily, then turned over beneath a pile of quilts. Somewhere, Agnes Merrill would be making her way back from the cemetery, her footprints already softening in the snow. And in the Ashford house, Margaret would be unwrapping the bouquet and setting it on the mantel, the blue ribbon catching the light from the fire. The thought that his flowers were now scattered like quiet stars across the town filled Elias with a tender, almost luminous sense of connection. The shop might be small, its walls close, but tonight its reach felt wide, extending into sick rooms and small kitchens, into school desks and graveyards and parlors. It was not a reach of power, but of presence, of color and scent, and the small, steady comfort of knowing that someone had thought of you, if only for a moment. He straightened from the counter and crossed to where Tomas lay sleeping. The boy's face, softened by rest, looked younger than it did during the day. The lines of recent grief eased in slumber. A single curl of hair had fallen across his forehead. Elias brushed it back with a feather-light touch, careful not to disturb him. He drew the coat a little higher over the sleeper's shoulder and felt, as he did so, a quiet sense of guardianship, not heavy or solemn, but gentle and sure. In this small corner of the night, he was the one who kept watch, and the knowledge sat easily with him. After tending to the boy, he made himself a simple cup of hot water with a slice of dried lemon, letting the pale steam warm his face. Tea would have been stronger, but he did not wish for stimulation. What he wanted was only a mild comfort, something to hold in his hands as he walked the shop one more time, making sure all was in its place. He sipped slowly, the mild citrus scent mingling with pine and rose, and thought of how many winters he had stood on this floor, watching snow fall on the cobbles. Each year had been a little different. New faces, new joys and sorrows, new bouquets that would be remembered, others that would be forgotten. Yet the rhythm remained, steady as the ticking clock, as the turning of the seasons outside the town, beyond the fields, under the count of stars. From time to time, he caught himself thinking of closing, of turning down the lamps further, of hanging the sign at last, of climbing the stairs to his own bed. Each time the thought came, he considered it calmly and set it aside. It was not stubbornness that kept him below, nor any sense of obligation he could easily name. It was simply that the night did not yet feel finished, and he had learned to trust such feelings. There was a subtle expectancy in the stillness, a sense that something more might yet arrive, not in the form of grand events, but as another small story, another quiet knock on the glass. So he waited, without strain, as the hours when the town slept flowed gently around the little shop. The flowers glowed softly in their places. The wreaths hung patiently on the walls. The evergreen branches breathed their slow, resinous breath. Outside, the snow continued its endless, peaceful descent, covering the street in deeper layers, smoothing tracks, softening corners, making the world seem, for a time, simpler and kinder. Inside, Elias' heart kept watch with his lamps and his flowers and his sleeping apprentice, a quiet guardian at the heart of a winter dream. The hours that followed slipped by with the soft, unmarked smoothness of water under ice. Outside, the town had sunk into its deepest sleep. The last restless window darkened. The final carriage wheel track half filled with powdery snow. The gas lamps along the street burned on in patient silence, their glass chimneys haloed with frost, their light falling onto the whitened cobblestones in round, muted pools. The sky above the roofs had taken on that particular depth of darkness that comes only in the small hours, when the night feels full and complete, yet almost ready to begin its retreat. Within the flower shop, the world had narrowed to a warm, fragrant circle of lamplight and shadow. Tomas slept soundly near the stove, wrapped in the old coat that served him as a blanket, his breathing a soft, steady whisper. The stove itself hummed with a low, comforting murmur, sending out waves of heat that smoothed the chill from the corners of the room. The flowers, in their vases and buckets, seemed to be dreaming as well. Roses, with their heads bowed just slightly, evergreen branches standing like small, faithful sentries, wreaths resting against the wall in a patient row. The clock above the door went on marking the minutes in its quiet, tireless way, each tick a small silver bead threaded onto the long string of the night. Elias moved gently among these quiet companions, the soles of his shoes making almost no sound on the wooden floor. He had done what little needed doing, freshened the water where he could, gathered stray leaves into his hand, turned down one lamp, and trimmed the wick of another, so that their flames burned with a calm, clear steadiness. There was very little left that required attention, and yet he did not feel hurried toward sleep. Instead, he carried within him a tranquil watchfulness, as though he were keeping company with the night itself, seeing it through to the far shore. From time to time, he paused at the window, looking out at the pale, empty street. The snow lay deep enough now to soften the edges of the curbstones and to turn the roofs into smooth, rounded lines. The only marks upon it were those of earlier visitors, the crisp, determined path of Agnes Merrill toward the churchyard, the longer stride of Henry Dalton heading toward the works, the lighter tracks, almost smudged by drifting flakes, left by Samuel Carter and Margaret Ashford. They were becoming less distinct as the hours wore on, their edges blurred by new snow, their shapes gentled as memories are gentled by distance. It was as Elias stood there, his hand resting lightly on the windowsill, that a faint sound reached him from beyond the glass. A soft, uncertain crunch of boots on snow, followed by another, then a slight pause. It was not the confident tread of someone accustomed to walking late through the town, nor the firm stride of a man on his way to work. It sounded more like the hesitant approach of someone who was not entirely sure they were in the right place, or that they had the right to be out at all. He waited, listening. The steps came closer, then stopped just short of the door. For a moment, there was only silence, and then a tentative shadow darkened the frosted pane as someone leaned closer, peering in. The knock, when it came, was small and almost apologetic, as though the knuckles were not entirely convinced they should make contact with the wood. Elias smiled to himself, a quiet, unseen curve of the lips, and crossed the room at his usual unhurried pace. He opened the door, and the bell above it chimed in a clear, delicate note that seemed almost too bright for such a late hour. A breath of cold air flowed in around a man standing on the threshold, his shoulders dusted with snow, his cheeks pink from the night. He was young, perhaps only a little older than Tomas, though the faint lines of worry at the corners of his mouth suggested responsibilities that had come early. His coat was plain but sturdy, the sort worn by clerks or shop assistants rather than laborers, and his hands, visible where they gripped the brim of his hat, were ink-stained rather than calloused. His hair was rumpled, as if he had run his fingers through it repeatedly on his way here, and his eyes, wide and earnest, held a mixture of embarrassment and determination. "Good evening," Elias said gently, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world for a customer to arrive at such an hour. "You have braved the late snow," the young man swallowed, his breath clouding faintly in front of him. Yes. I hope I am not unforgivably late, Mr. Hart. I know the hour is well past decent. My name is Andrew Fletcher. I work at the post office on the late sorting shift." He hesitated, tightening his grip on his hat. "I finished my work, and then I remembered something I had forgotten. Or rather, someone. Come inside, Mr. Fletcher," Elias said, stepping back. "The snow will not mind if you leave it a moment. We still have flowers awake." Andrew stepped into the shop, blinking briefly at the warmth and light, his eyes drifting over the wreaths and vases with a kind of quiet wonder, as if he had not seen them at such close quarters before. He set his hat carefully on the counter, as though entering a small ceremony, and rubbed his chilled hands together once, quickly, as if ashamed of the gesture. "My wife, Lucy," he began, his voice low but gaining steadiness as he spoke the name. "She is at home now, in our rooms above the baker's, with our little girl. It is our first Christmas with the child. I meant to buy flowers for them, not many, just a small bunch, for the table, to make the room feel special." He flushed, glancing down. But the day was long. There were parcels from the city, and telegrams, and a delay on the afternoon train. By the time my shift ended, I had quite forgotten. I was halfway home when I saw your lamps. He looked up at Elias with an expression that held both hope and self-reproach. "I know it is late," he said, "but I could not bear the thought of Lucy waking to a bare table, knowing I had promised her a bit of green and color." Elias listened with a gentle attentiveness, nodding slightly. "There are few things more important," he said, "than keeping such promises, even if they are remembered at the 11th hour. We shall find something for your table." He moved toward a smaller stand where shorter stems and modest arrangements waited, as though they had been keeping themselves ready for such a need. "You said a small bunch. Tell me about your rooms." Andrew's face softened as he pictured them. "They are not large," he said. "2 rooms, really. A sitting room with a table by the window, and a bedroom behind. The walls are thin, but Lucy has hung up some curtains she sewed herself. The baker's ovens keep the place warm, and if you lean out, you can see the church steeple just the top." He smiled, almost shyly. "Lucy likes simple things, white and green. She says too many colors make her head spin." "A woman of good sense," Elias remarked. He chose 2 white carnations, their ruffled petals soft and full, and nestled them among a trio of short pine branches and a small tuft of boxwood. The resulting cluster was modest, but quietly graceful, with enough green to scent the room and enough white to brighten the table. As he wrapped the stems in paper, he added, almost as an afterthought, a single sprig of red berries, tucked low where it would not shout, but merely glow. "A small fire in the arrangement," he said, "for your hearth." When he handed the little bouquet to Andrew, the young man took it with both hands, as if it were made of something finer than petals and stems. "It is more than I expected," he murmured. "Lucy will. She will be very pleased. She has had a tiring year, with the baby and all." I want her to know I see how much she does." "The flowers will say so for you," Elias replied. "Sometimes they find the spaces between our words and fill them." He named a price that a post office clerk could manage, without hardship, no more than the cost of a simple supper. Andrew paid at once, then lingered a moment, his eyes drifting over the sleeping form of Tomas, the shelves, the lamplit vases. "I have passed this shop 100 times, he said quietly, as if thinking aloud, always meaning to come in, and always in a hurry, or telling myself flowers were for people with more money or more occasion. "I am glad I did not hurry past tonight." "So am I," Elias said. "Now go home. The sooner you place these on your table, the longer they will keep you company." Andrew smiled, tucked the small bouquet carefully inside his coat against the cold, and took up his hat. He thanked Elias once more, with a sincerity that needed no ornament, and stepped back out into the snow, the bell chiming softly behind him. Through the window, Elias watched him hurry down the street, his shoulders bent slightly against the wind, his hands held close to his chest where the flowers lay hidden. The tracks of his boots joined the fading network of footprints, another line drawn briefly upon the white canvas of the night. For a time after Andrew had gone, the shop returned to its quiet. Elias thought, not for the first time, that this might indeed be the last visitor. The hour was advanced. The town's sleep felt deeper. Even the snow seemed to fall in slower, more thoughtful patterns. Yet the sense of subtle expectancy had not entirely left him. It lingered like a soft pressure in the air, a feeling that one more thread was still to be woven into the fabric of the night. He did not have to wait very long. Perhaps half an hour later, though the clock's hands seemed indifferent to the exact measure, there came a different kind of approach along the street. The steps were almost too light to hear, and the figure that emerged from the darkness toward the shop window moved with the particular hesitancy of someone who is not entirely sure they should be there at all. There was a pause just beyond the pool of lamplight, then a brief, almost retreating movement, as if the person had turned away. A moment later, the shadow returned, closer this time, and the sound of a knuckle against the door followed. 3 quick, soft taps, like a question asked under the breath. Elias opened the door to find a man standing there, who might otherwise have been easily overlooked in a crowd. He was of middling height, wrapped in a plain overcoat that had seen several winters, and his hat was pulled low over his brow. His spectacles had fogged slightly from the cold, and he removed them at once, polishing them with a handkerchief in a gesture that seemed more nervous than practical. Beneath the brim of his hat, his hair was thinning. His face was neither young nor old, but there was something almost boyish about the uncertainty in his eyes. "Good night," the man said, his voice soft and careful, as though each word had to be coaxed out gently. "I beg your pardon for disturbing you at such an hour. I am James Wilton. I work at Fenley's bookshop on the High Street. We have not met, but I have often seen your roses in the windows when I close the shutters at dusk." "Come in, Mr. Wilton," Elias said, standing aside with the same quiet courtesy he had shown all his visitors. "No apology is needed. The lamps are still lit. Therefore, we are still receiving." James stepped inside, holding his hat in front of him like a shield. As his gaze moved over the shop, his shoulders loosened slightly, and a faint, almost shy wonder appeared in his eyes. "It is very peaceful," he said, "like the quiet corner of a library, where the dust is golden and the pages have time to settle. That is a description I will treasure. Elias replied. What brings you to us tonight? James hesitated, then cleared his throat, his fingers tightening on the brim of his hat. There is a woman, he said, and the simplicity of the words seemed to cost him something. She comes to the bookshop every week, sometimes twice. She teaches music at the Ladies' Academy. She is not young, exactly, but not old either. She has the look of someone who has learned to be content with her own company. His eyes went briefly distant, as if he saw her standing between the shelves. She buys small books of poetry, and sometimes she lingers over the shelf of travel guides, as if traveling with her eyes. He drew a steadying breath. I have admired her for some time. From a distance, of course. We speak of books and weather, and of nothing that matters. And when she leaves, I think of all the things I did not say. Today she bought a worn copy of songs for the pianoforte. She mentioned that she would be spending Christmas alone, as most of her pupils are away. I walked her to the door, and I wanted to ask whether I might call upon her, or at least wish her more than a pleasant holiday. But the words, he gave a small, rueful smile. They did not come. She left. I watched her go, and I closed the shutters. And all evening, as I stacked ledgers and wrapped volumes, I thought of how she would find no flowers on her table tomorrow. His voice had grown softer, more strained, by the time he reached the end. I have no great expectations, he said. I am not a young hero from a novel, but I would like, just once, to send her something that says, you are seen. You are not entirely alone in the world. I thought, perhaps, a very small bouquet, something that could be left at her door with a card, if you would be so kind as to write only a friend who admires your music. It is foolish, I know, but it is the only kind of courage I seem to have. Elias regarded him with a warmth that did not show in grand gestures, but in the gentling of his eyes. There are many kinds of courage, he said. Some shout, some whisper. The quiet ones are no less real. He moved toward the table where the flowers were gathered, thinking of a woman who spent her days among scales and arpeggios, filling rooms with sound, and her evenings perhaps in a still, tidy apartment above some street, the piano closed, the silence too complete. For a music teacher who keeps her own company, he murmured, half to himself. We shall choose something that looks like a melody. He took up a pale pink rose, not as bold as the red, nor as formal as the white, but holding within its petals a softness that suggested warmth and gentleness. Around it, he gathered a few sprigs of baby's breath, their tiny white blossoms like high, tinkling notes in a quiet song, and some slender greenery that curved naturally, like the lines of a treble clef. He added a short, feathery branch of fern to lend delicacy, and a small tuck of ivy for steadfastness. The bouquet that formed in his hands was modest and graceful, its colors muted but harmonious. It did not shout of romance. It whispered of esteem, of thoughtful regard. He tied the stems with a ribbon of soft, dusky rose, its hue close to the blossom it encircled, and wrapped them in a slip of paper that left the petals exposed but guarded the stems against the cold. For the lady of music, Elias said, placing the bouquet gently on the counter. Shall I write the card as you asked? James nodded, his throat working. If you would. Elias took a small blank card from a drawer, and with his neat, even hand, wrote the words, To the teacher of songs, from a friend who admires your music. He let the ink dry a moment, then slipped the card into the fold of the paper so that it would not be visible until the bouquet was lifted. When he pushed the arrangement toward James, the man took it as if he were accepting a delicate instrument. "She may only smile and set it aside," he said, as though preparing himself for the smallest outcome. "But perhaps, just for a moment, she will feel less overlooked." "That will be enough," Elias answered. "You have given her that moment already, in the thinking. The flowers will merely carry it to her door." James paid without argument, leaving on the counter a little more than Elias had named, as if afraid to seem stingy with his own heart. He put on his hat and buttoned his coat, tucking the bouquet carefully inside his arm as if it were a cherished volume. At the door, he paused, turning back with a look of shy gratitude. "Thank you," he said, "for not laughing, for not telling me I am a foolish man with foolish ideas." "I have seen many foolish things in my time," Elias replied. "This is not among them. Walk carefully, Mr. Wilton. The snow can be deep where the lamplight does not reach." With a small, almost courtly inclination of his head, James stepped out into the night. The bell gave one final, crystalline chime, and the cold air slipped briefly around Elias before the door closed again. Through the window, he watched the bookseller's slight figure move down the street, the bouquet a small, bright shape against the darker line of his coat, heading toward whatever quiet street the music teacher called home. When James Wilton's footsteps had faded into the hush of the snow, the town's stillness returned in full, like a breath drawn in and gently held. This time, the sense of expectancy in the air lifted, leaving behind a deep, tranquil satisfaction, as though the night had completed the pattern it had been patiently weaving. Elias stood a moment longer by the door, his hand resting lightly on the latch, feeling the calm settle around him like a soft, warm cloak. These were the last, he thought, not with regret, but with a quiet certainty. The post clerk for his young family, the bookseller for his solitary music teacher, the final notes in the gentle symphony of visitors that had passed through his shop this Christmas Eve. He turned back toward the sleeping flowers and the drowsing boy by the stove, the lamps casting their mellow light over everything, and knew that the time had come to shift from receiving to giving unasked. The door had welcomed its last guests for the night. What remained now would be done behind closed glass, in the tender privacy of the hours before dawn. When the door had closed behind James Wilton and his hesitant bouquet, the silence that flowed back into the shop felt different from all that had come before. It was not the expectant quiet that waits for another knock, nor the uncertain hush of unfinished business. It was a settled stillness, gentle and complete, like the soft pause at the end of a well-played piece of music. Outside, the town lay in its deepest sleep, the snow a continuous, delicate curtain between the houses and the sky. Inside, the lamps burned with a mellow, steady light, and the flowers rested in their vases, as if they, too, were breathing slowly in the long winter night. Elias stood for a while, with his hand still resting on the door latch, feeling the coolness of the metal beneath his fingers and the warmth of the room at his back. His gaze lingered on the faint reflections in the glass, the overlapping images of the snowy street beyond and the flower-filled shop within. The paths of the evening's visitors, invisible now beneath the fresh layers of snow, remained clear in his mind. Samuel's hurried steps to the far side of town, Clara's careful walk toward the schoolhouse, Henry's long stride to the works, Agnes's faithful path to the graveyard, Margaret's carriage ride to her mother's house, Andrew and his tiny family above the bakers, James and his music teacher in some quiet street. Their stories had woven themselves through the shop like threads of different colors, and now they lay gently together, forming a pattern that felt whole. At last, with a soft, decisive movement, Elias turned the key in the lock. The mechanism clicked into place, a sound almost too small to notice, yet it drew a faint line between the world outside and the world within. He did not dim the lamps or reach for the closed sign, which still rested on the counter where Tomas had left it earlier in the evening. The shop was indeed closed to customers now, but it was not finished with its work. There remained a different kind of task to be done, one that did not require coins or conversation, only hands and thought and a quiet willingness to give. He walked back into the heart of the shop, listening to the slow rhythm of the boys breathing near the stove. Tomas had shifted in his sleep, one arm now tucked beneath his head, his hair flopped over his brow. The old coat that covered him had slipped a little, and Elias gently drew it back up over his shoulder, tucking it in around him with the instinctive care of someone who has watched over sleepers before. The boy did not wake, but his features eased into an even deeper calm, as if some inner part of him recognized the touch and rested more securely because of it. For a short while, Elias simply stood in the center of the room and looked around. The shop had fewer flowers than it had in the afternoon, but more than enough for what he had in mind. The roses, though not as fresh as they had been at dusk, still held their fragile radiance. The evergreens remained strong and willing, their scent a steady song in the warm air. There were wreaths that had not been chosen, small bundles of holly and mistletoe waiting in their baskets, and an assortment of modest blossoms that had stood at the edges of grander arrangements and never quite been called upon. To many eyes, these might have been seen as leftovers, the remnants of a busy day. To Elias, they were simply unspoken possibilities. He moved toward the counter and rolled up his sleeves once more, revealing the familiar length of forearms marked by faint nicks and scratches from years of working with thorns and wire and stems. The weariness in his body whispered that he had earned his rest, but there was a deeper, gentler energy that stirred at the thought of the work ahead. This part of the night belonged entirely to him and to his own quiet choices. No one would ask for what he was about to make. No one would pay for it. There would be no names written on cards. The gifts themselves would have to carry his intentions, traveling out into the town like small, silent emissaries of the warm light that still filled the shop. He began with a large wooden crate, pulling it out from beneath the counter and setting it on the floor near the workbench. Into the bottom he laid a folded piece of burlap, then another, making a soft bed that would protect the stems from the chill of the air outside. Then he turned to the table and selected a modest rose, not the showiest bloom, but one whose petals had opened generously over the course of the evening, revealing a heart still tender and full. Around it, he gathered a circlet of evergreen, some spruce, and a small spray of holly, tying them together with simple twine rather than ribbon. This bouquet was not meant for ceremony. It was meant for comfort. As his hands worked, a place came to mind. The small, neat house at the end of Mill Lane, where a woman named Mrs. Harrow had lost her son in the autumn and had not yet found the habit of speaking of him without her voice catching. He had seen her once or twice since, moving through the market with her eyes fixed on her basket, as if she feared that any glance upward might crack something inside her chest. "For her," he murmured, laying the finished bouquet reverently into the crate. to rest by his portrait or wherever her hands decide. He did not need to write her name or attach a message. The flowers themselves would say what needed saying. You are thought of. Your sorrow is seen. There is still color in the world that is willing to sit quietly beside your grief. The next bouquet grew from 2 white carnations and a handful of ivy. He bound them with a narrow ribbon of soft green that had been too short for customers' requests, but perfect for a smaller gesture. As he turned the stems between his fingers, he thought of the little room above the cobbler's shop where an elderly man named Mr. Brannigan lived alone. The cobbler had mentioned, in passing, that the old man's brother had emigrated years before and that no letters had come in a long time. On summer mornings, Elias had sometimes seen Mr. Brannigan sitting at the window, watching the street with an expression that seemed to be listening for footsteps that never came. For his windowsill, Elias decided quietly, a bit of green to keep him company when he looks out. One by one, the bouquets took shape beneath his hands. Some were very small, a simple clutch of pine and boxwood with a single sprig of berries, ideal for the corner of a kitchen table where a woman might knead bread at dawn. Others were slightly larger, destined perhaps for the polished piano of the music teacher who had never ordered flowers for herself, or the bedside of a child recovering from a lingering cough in a house where the family could barely afford coal. He made one entirely of evergreens and holly, sturdy and fragrant, imagining it left upon the steps of the church where those who came to pray early would find it, and place it where candles burned and voices whispered. As he worked, the shop seemed to lean in around him, its quiet deepening but never becoming heavy. The gentle rustle of paper, the soft snip of shears, the whisper of twine drawn tight, these sounds filled the space between the ticking of the clock and the slow breaths of the sleeping boy. Elias did not rush. Each bouquet, no matter how modest, received the same careful attention he had given to the grandest arrangements in busier years. He turned stems so that leaves faced outward, trimmed ends at a clean angle, removed any bruised petal with a tenderness that bordered on apology. It was important, he felt, that these unasked-for gifts carry no hint of haste or leftoverness. They must feel intentional, as deliberate as if some unseen hand had placed an order for them. At one point, as he leaned to set a finished bouquet in the crate, a soft sound behind him made him glance over his shoulder. Tomas had shifted again, and his eyes had opened to narrow slits. For a moment, the boy looked confused, half caught between dream and waking, his gaze wandering over the lamplit shop and the flowers spread out on the table. "Uncle," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Are there more customers?" "No," Elias answered with a small smile. "Only flowers that wish to travel, and no one to ask for them." Tomas blinked, trying to follow this, then pushed himself up on one elbow. "What are you doing then?" "Making bouquets for those who will not come through the door," Elias said, "for neighbors who think they have been forgotten, and for places that have been too quiet this year." He paused for a moment, then added, "If you wish to sleep, you may. If you wish to help, you may do that too." The boy hesitated, caught between the softness of his makeshift bed and the pull of this new, secret work. After a moment, he swung his legs over the side of the crates and stood, swaying slightly before finding his balance. "I will help," he said, in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who, though tired, does not want to miss what feels important. Elias handed him a handful of evergreen cuttings and a small pile of narrow ribbons, too short for larger arrangements. Tie these, then, he instructed gently. Make little bundles. They do not need flowers. The green is enough. We will leave them where cold hands might be glad of the thought of warmth. Tomas set to work beside him, his movements slower than usual, but careful. His fingers clumsy for the first few knots, and then gradually surer. He did not talk much. Words felt almost too loud for this hour. Once he asked, in a half-whisper, "Will people know they are from us?" "Some may guess," Elias replied. "Others will not. It does not matter. What matters is that, for a moment, they will feel that something kind has passed near them." He placed another finished bouquet into the crate, nestling it among its companions. "The town has given us much, you and me, our bread, our days, our stories. It is good to give back in ways that do not ask to be named." They worked in that way for some time, two figures in a small circle of lamplight, surrounded by green and white and the soft glints of red berries. Their shadows moving on the walls like quiet attendants. Slowly, the crate filled. Row upon row of small, thoughtful arrangements, each one holding some particular intention, some silent message of comfort or gratitude or simple companionship. The shop, which had already seen so many bouquets carried out through its door that night, now seemed to be gathering this final harvest of giving within itself, preparing to send it outward with the coming dawn. Eventually, the flowers that remained were only those too weary to travel or too few to form anything more. Elias laid down his shears and looked at the crate with a mild, satisfied nod. "That is enough," he said softly. "We must leave a few to greet the morning here. We do not want the shop to wake empty." Tomas, whose eyelids were once more heavy, leaned against the edge of the table and regarded the crate with a kind of sleepy wonder. "It looks like a garden," he murmured. "A garden in a box. A garden that will not stay in its box for long," Elias answered. "Soon it will be scattered through the town, and no one will know where the blossoms began. That is the best kind of garden." The boy smiled at that, then yawned without meaning to, covering his mouth with the back of his hand. Elias placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "That is enough helping for tonight," he said. "Go back to your nest by the stove. We will carry these out together when the sky begins to think of morning." Thomas did not argue. He returned to his makeshift bed, lay down with a small, contented sigh, and was asleep again almost before he had finished settling his head on the folded sacking. Elias drew the coat over him once more and stood for a moment watching the slow rise and fall of his breathing. Then he turned back to the crate, resting his hand on its rough wooden edge. The bouquets within lay quiet and ready, their colors subdued by the lamplight, their scents mingling in a soft, harmonious murmur. They would leave the shop at first light, to appear on church steps and narrow windowsills, at doorways and beside beds, small surprises waiting in the chill. No one would knock when they were delivered. No names would be spoken. Only the flowers and the snow and the waking hearts of those who found them would know that, in the long, quiet night before Christmas morning, the little shop at the corner had stayed awake, thinking of them in the language of green and petal and gentle, wordless grace. At some point in the long, quiet stretch of the night, the darkness outside the shop window began to thin. Not suddenly, but in the soft, gradual way that feels more like a change in breath than a change in light. The sky, which had been a deep, velvety black above the rooftops, shifted imperceptibly toward a muted gray blue, a color like the inside of a seashell. The snow, still falling, caught that faint new shade and held it gently, turning from silver to the palest suggestion of rose along the highest drifts. The town was not yet awake, but the night had reached the place where it begins, very tenderly, to loosen its hold. Inside Heart and Bloom's, the lamps still burned, their flames small but steady, casting golden circles on the floor and warming the air with their quiet presence. The flowers in their vases seemed to have settled into a peaceful stillness, the roses holding their bowed heads with a kind of dignified weariness, the evergreen branches standing firm and fragrant, the wreaths along the walls resting in patient arcs of green, the crate near the workbench filled with carefully made bouquets for those who had not thought to ask for them, sat like a small, secret garden waiting for dawn. The clock above the door ticked on, marking out the last measures of the night with the same calm insistence it had shown all day. Elias, who had dozed for a short time in the chair near the counter, woke as gently as the sky. There was no jolt, no sudden start, only a gradual awareness of himself returning fully to the room, of the soft weight of his own hands resting in his lap, of the faint stiffness in his shoulders from hours of quiet work. He lifted his head and took in the familiar shapes around him, the lamps, the vases, the sleeping boy near the stove, and felt a deep, quiet contentment move through him like warmth. His body was tired, yes, but it was the kind of tiredness that comes from meaningful exertion, from hours spent not in haste or worry, but in careful, steady giving. He rose slowly from the chair, smoothing his apron as he stood, and crossed first to Tomas. The boy lay curled on his side, lips parted in sleep, one hand tucked beneath his cheek, the other resting loosely on the floor. The coat that covered him had slipped again, and Elias drew it up gently, tucking it around him with a tenderness that was almost habitual now. For a moment he watched the slow rise and fall of the boy's back, listening to the soft, even breaths that mingled with the distant murmur of the stove. Then he laid a light hand on his shoulder and spoke in a quiet, coaxing tone. "Tomas," he said, "it is nearly morning. Time to wake, little gardener." Tomas stirred, mumbling something indistinct, and then, as the words reached him, he blinked his eyes open. For a moment his gaze was unfocused, wandering from the stove to the ceiling beams to his uncle's face, as if surprised to find the night still wrapped around the familiar room. "Is it Christmas?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "It is almost," Elias replied, a smile softening his features. "The day is not yet fully here, but it is coming. We have a small errand to run before we let it arrive without us." He gestured toward the crate. "Come and see what the night has done while you slept." The boy sat up, rubbing at his eyes, then pushed the coat aside and rose to his feet. He crossed the room slowly, his bare steps soundless on the wooden floor, and stopped beside the crate. The bouquets within, touched now by the first faint suggestion of daylight filtering through the window, seemed to glow with a muted, tender color. Whites and greens and small, careful touches of red and blue nestled together in orderly rows, like a field of little lights waiting to be scattered into the world. Tomas's face brightened, sleep falling away in the presence of this quiet abundance. "We really made all of these," he said, almost in wonder. "It looked like so much less when it was in buckets and baskets. Sometimes it is only when we gather things together that we see how much there is," Elias answered. "Now we must let them go again. They have places to be. Between them, without rush, they began to prepare for the small journey through the town. Elias fetched his coat from its peg near the back door, a sturdy, well-brushed garment that had kept many winters at bay. He pulled it on over his shirt and waistcoat, then wrapped a woolen scarf around his neck, its ends tucked snugly into the front. His gloves, softened by years of use, went on last, their leather cool against his skin. Tomas donned his own simpler coat, which had been folded over the back of a chair, and wound a knitted scarf around his throat. The color faded, but the warmth intact. His boots, set neatly by the door earlier in the evening, went onto his feet with a few soft thumps of heel against sole. Elias turned down the lamps one by one, leaving only the one nearest the door burning at half its strength. The shop dimmed, but did not fall into shadow. Instead, it took on a gentler, more contemplative light, as if it, too, were preparing to rest. The flowers that remained those not placed in the crate looked back at him with quiet acceptance. They would greet the customers of the next day, or simply keep him company through the quieter hours of the season. Either way, they seemed content. At last, when all was set, Elias bent his knees and lifted the crate with careful, practiced strength. It was not overly heavy, but it had a weight that felt more symbolic than physical. The weight of many small intentions carried in one pair of arms. "Open the door for me, if you will," he said to Tomas, "and mind your footing. The snow may have grown ambitious while we were indoors." Tomas nodded eagerly and hurried to the front, undoing the lock with hands that had grown deft in the course of this long day and night. When he pulled the door inward, the bell gave a soft, familiar chime, and a breath of cold air drifted in, clear and clean, and edged with the faintest promise of the coming dawn. The snow just beyond the threshold rose in a small, rounded drift, its upper surface tinged with the slightest blush of color from the waking sky. They stepped out together into the chilled, pink-touched stillness of the street. For a heartbeat, both paused, taking in the transformed world. The night's steady snowfall had smoothed every surface into gentle curves and soft lines. Roofs wore thick caps of white. Windowsills were edged in pale, powdery trim. The steps leading up to doors were sugared in delicate layers. The gas lamps still burned, their light paling now as the sky gathered more of its own. Above the chimneys, thin threads of smoke began to rise from a few houses, early signs of fires being coaxed into life for the day. Elias adjusted his grip on the crate and nodded in the direction of the church at the far end of the street. "We will start there," he said quietly, "then work our way back. The town is still dreaming. We will move like part of the dream." They walked in slow, measured steps, their boots pressing neat tracks into the smooth surface of the snow. The air was very still, the kind of stillness that makes every small sound distinct. The soft crunch of each footfall, the faint creak of bare branches in a tiny movement of breeze, the distant, muffled call of a rooster somewhere beyond the cluster of houses. Tomas walked slightly ahead, occasionally pointing out the first hints of color along the horizon, where the sky was deepening into a tender, luminous pink. At the church steps, Elias set the crate down carefully and lifted out one of the sturdier evergreen bouquets, the one he had made entirely of fir and holly. The stone of the steps was dusted with snow, and the great wooden doors remained closed, but a faint glow from within suggested candles already burning for the morning service. He placed the bouquet gently beside the entrance, where it would be seen by the first hands that reached for the iron handles, and brushed a few stray flakes from its leaves. "For all who enter today," he said softly, more to himself than to Tomas, "that they may carry the scent of green with them into their prayers." From there, they moved along the street, stopping at certain doors and windows with an instinct born of years of knowing the town and its people. At Mrs. Harrow's house at the far end of Mill Lane, Elias left the modest rose and evergreen bundle on the doorstep, tucking it near the jamb so it would not be buried by falling snow. At the cobbler's, he reached up to place the white carnations and ivy on the narrow sill outside Mr. Brannigan's window, where the old man would see them as soon as he drew back his thin curtains. They found the lane that led past the ladies' academy and left a small spray of green near the side entrance, a gesture for any teacher who might pass through, carrying her books and her long, patient days. At each stop, Tomas hovered close by, his breath a small cloud in the air, his eyes bright with the solemn excitement of this secret morning work. Once he whispered, "Will they know?" And Elias answered, as he had before, "Perhaps, but the not knowing is part of the gift." Little by little, the crate grew lighter. The bouquets, one after another, found their places in the sleeping town, on the ledge of a bakery window, where the early baker would see them as he unlocked the door, near the corner of the apothecary's shop, where a tired apprentice might find a moment of beauty amid bottles and jars, at the edge of the rail yard fence, where Henry Dalton, returning from his long night's watch, would pass and catch the sudden scent of pine. A few were left in places without any clear recipient, near worn benches or at the junction of narrow lanes, ready to be claimed by whatever hands or eyes needed them most. By the time they had completed their slow circuit and turned back toward Heart and Blooms, the sky had brightened to a clear, tender blue streaked with pale gold, where the first rays of the sun were touching the higher clouds. The snow on the rooftops glowed faintly pink, then shifted toward white gold as the light strengthened. Smoke from chimneys rose more steadily now, and faint sounds of waking life drifted through the air. The clatter of a bucket set down in a yard, the creak of a door, a child's sleepy voice from inside a house. The town was stirring, gently, into Christmas morning. Elias and Tomas stepped back into the shop, bringing with them a dusting of fine snow on their boots and the sharp freshness of the cold air clinging to their coats. The bell chimed once more, then fell silent as the door closed behind them. Inside, the shop seemed to exhale, welcoming them back into its warmth. The single lamp left burning cast a soft light over the remaining flowers, who now looked, in their smaller number, like a quiet choir that had sung through the night and was ready to rest. Elias set the now empty crate aside and pulled off his gloves, flexing his fingers as the warmth seeped back into them. Tomas unwound his scarf and shrugged out of his coat, his cheeks flushed from the cold and from a shy pride that he did not quite know how to express. "Will we open the shop now?" he asked, glancing toward the window where the light was growing stronger. "Not today," Elias replied, his voice kind but firm. "The flowers have done enough work for one Christmas, and so have we." He reached for the small wooden plaque that had waited patiently on the counter all night, its lettering neat and familiar. With a sense of calm ceremony, he walked to the door, opened it a little way, and hung the sign upon its hook so that it faced the street. The single word, painted in careful strokes, closed, looked almost like a benediction against the brightening snow. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the waking town. The street that had seemed so empty and mysterious in the night now appeared softer, friendlier, each doorway and window part of a larger, gentle whole. Somewhere in those houses, the flowers they had sent out would be found, a surprised hand reaching down, a face bending over petals, a brief ripple of warmth moving through a room. The thought filled him with a quiet gratitude, not for himself, but for the way this small night's work had linked his little shop to so many lives. When he closed the door again, he turned down the last lamp until its flame flickered delicately and then went out, leaving the shop in a calm, blue-tinged light that came only from the morning beyond the glass. The flowers, the ribbons, the vases, the wooden counters, all took on a softer, simpler appearance without the glow of gas flame. It looked, to his eye, like a room preparing for sleep after a long, wakeful vigil. "Upstairs, Tomas," he said gently. "It is our turn to rest. Christmas morning can begin without us for a little while." The boy nodded, suddenly yawning again as the pull of sleep returned with doubled strength. They made their way to the narrow staircase at the back, the wood creaking in the same familiar places, the banister smooth under their hands. As they climbed, Elias felt the warmth of the rooms above, drawing them upward. The promise of a kettle on the hob, of blankets, of a few hours' deep, untroubled sleep before the day called them back. On the landing, just before they parted for their own small rooms, Elias paused and looked back down the stairs. From here, he could see only a slice of the shop below the edge of a table, the curve of a wreath, the faint gleam of a glass vase. But in his mind, he held the whole picture of the night just past. Every visitor, every bouquet, every quiet conversation in the lamplight. It seemed to him that his little flower shop had, for one long winter's night, become something larger than itself, a kind of gentle harbor where the small boats of people's feelings had come in out of the dark. "It was a good night," Tomas said softly at his elbow, as if reading his thoughts. "Yes," Elias answered. "It was." They went then to their rest, leaving the shop to its own peaceful dreams. Below, the flowers stood in their vases, the air still holding the mingled scent of pine and rose and damp earth. Outside, the first true sunlight of Christmas Day, 1886, touched the snow on the window ledge, turning it to silver, then to white. Footsteps began to sound faintly on the cobbles, careful, merry, hurried, slow as the town woke fully to its morning. Somewhere, a bell rang out in clear, bright tones, and a child laughed. And if you let your own thoughts drift, you might imagine yourself there as well, walking slowly through the soft morning light, the snow muffling your steps as you make your way down that narrow, cobbled street. You might see the little shop on the corner, its windows faintly misted from the warmth within, the closed sign hanging quietly in its place, and yet feel, as you pass, that something inside still glows a gentle, resting light that has watched through the night and now sleeps with a peaceful heart. Perhaps, in your mind, you push the door open just a little and slip inside, finding yourself among the evergreen and roses, the ribbons and wreaths, in a room that smells of pine and warm wood and the soft, lingering sweetness of flowers. You might imagine sitting for a while on the worn wooden stool by the counter, listening to the faded echo of the clock's ticking, the memory of bells, the hush of snow beyond the glass. The air is calm, the light is soft, the world outside held at a kind distance. In this quiet place, your thoughts can loosen, like petals in warm water, and the cares of your own day can settle gently to the bottom of your mind, leaving the surface smooth and still. So, let this little flower shop at the edge of Christmas Eve remain with you as you drift toward your own rest. Its lamps dimmed, its flowers breathing quietly in the cool morning light, its door closed not in refusal, but in contentment. Let the slow snow, the soft chiming of bells, the distant scent of evergreen and rose surround you like a gentle blanket. May your night be as peaceful as that sleeping town, your dreams as kind as the bouquets waiting to be found, and your sleep as deep and restoring as the rest that finally comes to those who have given all the warmth they can. May you, too, find a calm corner where your heart can be still, and may this quiet story linger around you like a soft, protective light, blessing your thoughts and loosening your breath until at last you sink into a deep, gentle, and untroubled sleep.